This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by.
think the quarter past. Can I welcome members, officers and the public to today's meeting of the Transport Committee. Our main item of business today is a discussion on fare evasion. Please make sure that your electronic devices are switched off or to silent mode. And can I also ask guests and members to position their microphones so that they can be heard clearly? Can I start by asking our clerk, Hannah Barlow, if any apologies have been received?
Apologies from Assemblymember Desai, and Assemblymember Turrell is attending remotely.
Thank you. Can I ask the committee to note the recommendations set out at item 2 and ask if members have any other interest to declare? Can I ask the committee to note the outstanding actions arising from its previous meetings and the additional correspondence received? Thank you. Can I ask the committee to note the recent action taken by me as chair under delegated authority in consultation with party group lead members, namely to agree the committee's letter to the TfL Commissioner on delays in processing taxi and private hire licences? Thank you. And can I ask the committee to note the response from the TfL Commissioner to the committee's letter on delays in processing taxi and private hire licences, and the updated response from the Mayor of London to the committee's letter on river services? Thank you. We now move on to our main item of business, a discussion on fare evasion. Today's discussion will be split into 2 panels, and I'd like to welcome half of our first panel of guests. So joining us remotely, we have Michael Roberts, Chief Executive, London Travel Watch. Thank you very much, Michael, and apologies for the technical difficulties that meant we're starting a little bit late. Our second guest, Jared Wood, London Transport Regional Organiser for the RMT, is delayed by transport but will be with us any minute now. So it's all going really smoothly this morning. OK, so I will ask the first question, and then I'll be handing over to other Assembly members to follow up. So, Michael, from your point of view, from Travel Watch's point of view, does TfL's revenue protection summary set out the right approach to tackling fare evasion?
Good morning, Chair. Good morning, Assembly members. I think the strategy sets out the right elements, but I think the jury's out on whether the approach is going to have the impact that we would all want to see, including TfL, which is to reduce fare evasion. So I'm pretty confident in saying that the large majority of Londoners think it's just downright unfair, that some people are deliberately dodging their fares, and that ultimately is at the expense of those who do pay their way. And on the one hand, I think they would be glad to hear that TfL has an aim to cut the rate of evasion by, to less than half of what it is at the moment over the next 5 years. But on the other hand, I think from our intelligence, I think there would be a question mark as to whether it's going far enough. We carried out a snap poll. It's not representative, but we did a snap poll of recipients of our newsletter ahead of today's session to ask them what they thought about TfL's approach. And over 80%, more than 4 in 5 respondents, thought that TfL wasn't doing enough. 16% thought that they had the balance about right. 3% thought that they were too tough. And I think whilst the strategy has all the headline elements that people say they want to see in terms of the interventions, I don't think anyone really has seen enough of the substance that underpins that strategy to tell how much of a game changer it might turn out to be.
Thank you very much. Assembly Member Russell, I'm going to pass to you.
Thank you and good morning. So my question is about the equitability or the equitable nature of TfL's approach to penalty fares and enforcement. Do you think that the approach is fair?
Well, if I think about the casework that our team, the team that handles appeals, that they deal with, the volume of appeals to deal with penalty fare notices on TfL services is actually relatively low. And sometimes when we receive casework of that sort, actually, when we look at the detail, often actually we find that the individuals who have made the appeal are actually not in the right. I mean, it's interesting because when the penalty fare level was increased recently from £80 to £100, and that was done, I think, notionally to bring TfL penalty fares in line with national rail fares. We certainly had a concern then about the proportionality of the size of the penalty fare that would be applied. So, in theory, you could, miss paying out £1.75 for a bus fare and be landed with a £100 penalty fare. But as I said, as it happens, I mean, in terms of the appeals that we deal with, it's a relatively low part of our casework. So it's not immediately obvious that there is a systemic issue of inequitability. TfL, I think, are clear that penalty fares are kind of their main sanction. They have higher levels of sanction available to them, and I'm sure we'll come on to that later on. Particularly, going down the prosecution route for persistent offenders. But I think, broadly speaking, apart from occasional instances, it's not obvious that TfL are inequitable in this regard.
Mm-hmm. I'm thinking of examples like the woman who was arrested in Croydon, separated from her son, and she had actually tapped her ticket and her Oyster card and paid her fare correctly, but the way that she was accosted by the revenue inspection team, and it ended up somehow getting into quite an extreme situation where she ended up being handcuffed, arrested. They then took her card and realised that she had paid her fare, but it was an extremely distressing experience for her son. And the officer, I note, the judge in that case said it was not necessary to grab the woman's arm, arrest her or handcuff her, and there were no reasonable grounds to suggest arrest was necessary. Now that, I think, was the British Transport Police rather than TfL inspection officers, but it was a joint operation. And I just wondered, do you hear about other examples of that sort of disproportionality in your case workload?
It doesn't tend to be a heavy element of our caseload, particularly with regard to TfL enforcement. I think it's different if you look at national rail enforcement, where disproportionality, I think, is more of an issue. But I know that's not the focus of today's session. I mean, clearly the instance that you just mentioned, it is egregious, to put it mildly, and it kind of underlines the importance of making sure that whichever police authority is carrying out the enforcement, that they are using judgment, that they are well trained, that they use their intelligence in the broadest sense of the word to read the situation. And that also this system does enable people, for example, to be able to refer to their journey history to demonstrate that actually, no, in this sort of case, for example, it may have been a genuine mistake, or actually it wasn't even a genuine mistake, they were doing the right thing. I think all of those things are important. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Assembly Member Russell. Just like to acknowledge, welcome Jared Wood from the RMT, who's joined us in the chamber. We just have another couple of questions for Michael, and then we're going to come on to some questions to yourself. Thank you. I'm now going to Assembly Member Bakari.
Thank you. We're later on going to be talking to TfL about the psychology of fare evasion, but I wanted to ask you whether you're aware of any research that's done onto the societal causes of fare evasion. Is there any argument to say that there is an issue in terms of the cost of living playing a role in the frequency of fare evasion, from what you've seen from your own research or any work that you've done in this area?
No, we haven't seen any evidence or research of that sort.
And you haven't seen anything from TfL's perspective of doing their own research on this, have you?
I'm not aware of any.
Yeah. Okay, well, we'll ask her later on about that to TfL. But what have you also seen any or assessment on whether there's been any correlation between fare increases and fare dodging? So the increase of fares, has that corresponded to the dodging of fares as well?
I'm not aware of a correlation. That doesn't mean it doesn't exist, but it points to something that I've noted, which is the kind of lack of historical data around rates of fare evasion. So, it's difficult to track whatever rates might have been against a whole range of factors that might have, influenced that. I think we could all do with a little bit more data around, trends over a period of time, not just over the last couple of years, before we can start to answer those questions.
Okay, right, we'll leave it there then. Thank you.
Thanks. Assemblymember Prince.
I think my point's been covered, Chair. Thanks.
No worries. Assemblymember McCartney.
Thank you. My questions are to Jared, if I may. And we know from TfL's revenue protection summary that fare evasion and payment disputes are the root cause of approximately 50% of incidents of violence and aggression towards staff. And I wondered if you could just briefly outline to us what are the challenges that TfL's frontline staff face when they deal with fare evasion. You just have to press the red button in front of you. It's the little person.
There we go. Now it's red. Okay. Apologies again to the committee for my late arrival. It was a signal failure at Rickmansworth. But in answer to your question, the challenges that staff are facing from assaults, which you correctly identify as arising out of ticketing disputes in our experience, in a majority of cases, are growing and becoming more serious as well, I would suggest. One of the problems that staff identify when surveyed on this is de-staffing of stations, and particularly a far more prevalent use of lone working. So a member of staff will find themselves either in a remote part of a large station with no other staff nearby, or on a smaller station where they are the only member of staff on duty. And that creates quite an anxiety and stress on members, even before an incident has taken place. We found in a survey that 60% of our members reported that they had experienced some sort of assault, verbal or physical, in the recent past, and 60% of them had experienced a physical assault. So everyone has either experienced a physical assault or knows people, works with people who have experienced physical assaults. And then to be placed in a position where you are alone on a gate line or in a station and expected to try and deal professionally with people who haven't paid a fare and can't get through the barrier as a result, puts people into a very difficult position. So we believe that more station staff to give our members reassurance is absolutely critical at this time, and also quicker responses when incidents do occur, and a quicker response from the BCP in particular is another thing that our staff have identified.
And have you noticed that things have got worse over the last few years, and is there any work you've done that would indicate to us why that is the case?
Yeah, well, certainly the perception of staff is that things have got worse. We found there was a clear majority of staff that we surveyed. The number of assaults that the British Transport Police have prosecuted has increased. Of course, there is always a question over levels of reporting as against the number of incidents, but certainly our perception and data that is available suggests that it has got worse. Why that is complicated without a doubt. If we did an extensive survey of staff, and they identified factors that included some of the things I heard you discussing when I came in, social changes, But in particular, our staff identified a lack of an effective deterrent as one of the principal reasons that they felt less safe. They felt that people were less inhibited in behaving in that way because they didn't think that there was an effective threat of prosecution and a serious sanction if they weren't. And the other factor our members identified is the one I've already raised, which is the amount of lone working that they do, which they feel makes them more vulnerable, makes someone more likely to perhaps resort to some sort of physical violence than they would if there were more staff around.
And I don't know if your survey shows whether it's anything about the staff members that make them more likely to be abused, for example. Do you think people that are evading feel more open to abuse women or ethnic minority staff?
I'd have to say we haven't got data that would show that.
Okay, I'll ask TfL that later on. And can I ask, how does this concern or having to deal with fare evasion affect their ability to perform their other duties efficiently?
Well, it affects it enormously. If you're, if you're at a station 10 o'clock at night, you're the only person on duty, then many staff would feel extremely anxious in that situation about placing themselves out in the open on a gate line where you might be some distance from a place of safety. And in the event of an assault, there's very little you can do. There's no one you can call on for immediate help. And so that will make staff less confident about intervening in a situation, about talking to people. And that means that potentially you're not picking up passengers who just need some help with travel advice or something because there will be a concern for the member of staff's own safety.
And then from early last year, body-worn video has been a requirement for all TfL customer-facing operational staff. What impact has that had on staff safety? Has it helped?
Well, TfL have reported data to us which suggests that it has had a positive deterrent effect. We've not got any data that calls that into question. What I would say is that when we survey our own staff, it's fairly split actually between those who feel that the body-worn video it does help them as a deterrent, and those who think that actually it can make it more difficult for them to have a constructive relationship with the passengers they're talking to. They don't like to be perceived as recording someone right in front of them, and so some people feel that it can escalate things. But we are supportive of the use of body-worn video as a trade union. We do think people should have the right to choose whether they utilise it or not.
Okay, thank you. And then I noticed that you've just launched your own campaign Action Against Assault. So what work are you doing as part of this campaign, and what would you like to see TfL implement as a result of it?
Yeah, so we would, so in broad headline terms, we would like to see TfL providing more resources on stations in terms of staff, so as people feel more assured by having colleagues with them. We would like to see more work done on ensuring rapid responses from the British Transport Police when situations do develop, because it is our members' experience that that perpetrators of violence do not see alternatives to the British Transport Police as much as of a deterrent as they do the police themselves. I think we also feel that one of the thrusts, it seems to us, of the work that TfL is doing, we had a constructive discussion with TfL at a meeting on this last week, as a matter of fact. But TfL has a strategy, it seems to us, of increasing on-board ticket checks rather than trying to resolve the issue, as we would see it, at source by staffing the stations and ensuring that there are enough staff available to keep the ticket barriers up and in action and resolve ticketing issues at that point. Some people will come onto the system accidentally without the correct ticket because there was no one to assist them. Someone was on a meal break and the barriers are just left set in the open position. We need more meal break cover to prevent that sort of thing. We think we need more station staff to resolve these things and prevent the irregular travel before it takes place. And those ticket barriers and staff, you know, they screen 100% of journeys. Everyone that comes in or out has to go through those barriers. The on-board checks, I think TfL's target is just to check around 15% of journeys. So we think that there needs to be a re-evaluation of that and that we should be focusing on staffing the stations, providing the service to the public in the first place and ensuring that people have every opportunity to get the right ticket and that it's more difficult for them to get into the system if they haven't.
Thank you. And Chair, if I may ask a further question. You talked about the response of the British Transport Police. Could you just very briefly explain the system? So if I'm a frontline staff at a station, for example, in Outer London, where I might not have many colleagues with me, can I personally request a police officer to attend, or do I have to go through a TfL procedure to actually request an officer to attend?
Yeah, so you would go through the control centre, either using your Connect radio or or an auto telephone number, and in normal circumstances, the line controller for that line would then request BTP presence. The problem that we have is, of course, the BTP are massively overstretched. And particularly if you're in a station outside of Zone 1, then the response times can be enormous. I mean, I worked much of my career as a station supervisor at the north end of the Metropolitan line, and it would not be unusual to wait an hour and a half to 2 hours to get a response from the BTP. Sometimes that call would then get transferred to the Thames Valley Police because it was just impossible to get a BTP officer up there. So response times when an incident is happening is a real problem that our members report.
But presumably if there was an emergency that really required the Metropolitan Police, can be, you know, if it was a 999 incident, that would... That can happen, and it does, but there is still a significant delay created by that process, and also it's, you know, when a member of staff is under attack and makes an emergency call, they're not in a position to then follow that up and ring out, well, could you refer that to the Met, please? Difficult for the line controller because they're not on site, so they've got to make a judgment, do I need to pass this one over or whatever. So it really it's not unusual. I think it would be unusual outside of a really busy central London station where there may be BTP patrolling. It would be unusual for the BTP to arrive while an assailant is still present. In the majority of cases, the BTP job will be to take statements, download CCTV, and try and deal with the aftermath. Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Assemblymember McCartney. Assemblymember Mwema.
Good morning to both of you. My first question is to Michael, but I would welcome your thoughts, Jared. It's just off the back of something that you said about, for want of a better phrase, kind of defending the gate line rather than on-board checks. And I just wanted your thoughts, Michael, and then you, Jared, around TfL's use of the single justice procedure in the case of, particularly in places where people are less likely to tap in and out, for example, the DLR, because you may forget, or it's in a really odd place. And this is off the back of some casework that I have received, admittedly not lots, but it kind of proves the point that TfL does use the single justice procedure, which is being criticised in situations like licence fee. And so I just wondered if that is something that you have experienced, Michael, at Travelwatch, and what your views are around just the principle of what feels to me like an overreaction to, yes, incorrect behaviour, but criminalising somebody who may have made a mistake. And the terms of single justice procedure versus, for example, a parking ticket are just so much more onerous with lesser time to appeal and criminal sanction at the end. So maybe if I start with you, Michael.
Thank you. So actually, what you've said sounds like news to me, because our experience has been that the SJP has been used and brought into question with regard to train companies, train operators, but it hasn't been our experience that had been the case with regard to TfL services. So what you've said is news to me.
Yeah, I would have to echo that point. It's not something that's been brought to our attention or that we've discussed as a trade union. What I would say is that I think all our members would agree that if there were a perception that people were being unfairly penalised, then that's not something that's going to make it any easier to work in a station. If people feel that that the system is against them or whatever, we don't want that. We want to be working with passengers to assist their journeys. But it's not something that I've got experience of.
Okay, no, that's really helpful to know. It set a bit of an alarm bell in my mind when these two incidences occurred. They did happen on the DLR, but if it's not something that you have come across, then that might have been an anomaly in what was reported. But any future thoughts would be really welcome.
Yeah, I'd be happy to look at it if you want to send me anything.
Yeah, happy to speak to you afterwards, actually. It might just be a one-off, but two was a bit odd. So back to my substantive question to both of you again. What impact do open ticket barriers or no ticket barriers have at stations have on fare evasion? You've mentioned already, Jared, but perhaps if we start with Michael on screen and then come back to you.
I've not got any stats or data on this, but anecdotally, we definitely hear of people seeing open gate lines and observing that some fellow passengers go through them without tapping in, and people do not think that's right, and it's one of the reasons why across the menu of possible things that TfL could do, I think people do want to see gate lines used where they are available. Where they're not actually in place, they should be put in place, that there are sufficient members of staff to operate the gate lines, which I think picks up one of Jared's points about views from his membership. All of these things are referred to in the summary strategy document that TfL has produced about its approach to revenue protection relatively recently. But just going back to my point about, the headlines are all there, but the substance is missing. There's a document that talks about a strategy that aspires to be data-led. It's surprisingly data-light. So I didn't get any sense of, what's the level of resource that's going to be put into, for example, either increasing the amount of gate line infrastructure that's put in place on the network, or the resources are going to be put into improving the type of infrastructure that's put in place. Nothing about the level of resource around staffing, whether it's gate line staff, whether it's route protection officers, whether it's TSEOs, who I believe, and Jared may put me right here, but I believe are the only TfL staff that actually are able to engage in physical contact with passengers in these sorts of situations. And for me, that's, I appreciate you have a session later on this morning where you'll be questioning TfL. I think understanding what's the substance, what's the meat behind the headlines that would give either yourselves or us or the broader public confidence that the strategy is actually going to have some sort of impact.
Jared.
Yeah, well, the problem with unstaffed or open gate lines is not just for fare evasion, which I'll come to in a moment, but also a lot of passengers end up overpaying because of it, because they make a mistake, they don't realise they haven't tapped properly, they've tapped one end and not the other, and that results in an excessive fare being deducted from their bank card or their Oyster card. So that's something as well that doesn't help with the relationship between staff and the travelling public. But on fare evasion, then I think it's quite plain that if there's an open barrier, it presents a greater opportunity for fare evasion. TfL, when they presented their strategy to us last week, identified different categories of fare evader. two of those categories are people that have made one is people that have made accidental mistakes, and one is what they call an opportunist fare evader who didn't set out with the intention of not paying the fare, but saw the gate was open and thought, oh well, I'll avoid paying that then. Two of those categories out of four are eliminated if the barrier is staffed and if you've got if it's up and running. So I think it is important, and I think as well that when you look at TfL's data across nodes, I believe there's an under-recording of fare evasion on parts of the system, parts of the TfL system where there aren't barriers, because you're relying on a small sample of people stopped on trains to draw a conclusion. Whereas on London Underground, you're getting irregular fare reports and people who are approached on entry or exit of the system as well. So I do think it has a very significant impact.
And then just final one, just building on that, Jared. In addition to what you said, are there any improvements that TfL could make to infrastructure to reduce that fare evasion?
I think that's difficult. I think ultimately you're not going to be able to resolve the question of irregular travel with automated processes. I mean, ultimately you can't have a process that physically stops someone from leaving a station because they didn't have the right ticket with no staff there. Just entrap them till the morning and come and get them, or so really we think that the human approach is the only practical approach to this. You need someone who can interact with the person. You need to be able to make an assessment about whether a mistake's been made or whether there's fare evasion, and ultimately you need to be able to make a judgment about at what point to de-escalate something and move someone on or whatever. So people can use technology, body-worn cameras, etc. But you need people. You need trained London Underground staff who can assist people who've got a problem and properly record and process people who haven't.
Sorry, confused by the slight change in order. Back to me.
It's you again.
Yes, me again. And this question is for you, Jared.
Okay.
So has the introduction of transport support and enforcement officers been successful in supporting frontline TfL staff and reducing work-related violence and aggression?
So I certainly wouldn't want to understate the role that those people play. The RMT doesn't represent them, so Unite do. So I don't have first-hand experience of the experience of those staff. Certainly, they're committed people who play a role. Our members do feel that that using TSCOs as an alternative rather than a supplement to the British Transport Police is detrimental, and our members do, as I've already said, feel that the presence of warranted police officers is sometimes the only thing that will resolve a situation.
Thank you. So, with that in mind, perhaps slightly different membership. In your opinion, has TfL been effective in implementing its work-related violence and aggression strategy?
Well, I suppose it's had some successes in implementing its strategy. Whether its strategy is successful at dealing with the problem, I think, is more questionable. I don't want to make this too adversarial. We work together with TfL LUL on these matters, and we work with TfL LUL on supporting people after incidents as well. That's sometimes mixed, but sometimes very good. And we welcome many of the initiatives that have been introduced. But we do feel that there is a fundamental problem that TfL LUL face, which is their current budget situation. And without diverting the discussion into a completely different discussion, you will all be aware that TfL is the only transport authority of its type probably in the world, of any comparable city that operates with no operational subsidy, that has to raise its entire operational budget through its own commercial activities and predominantly fare revenues. And so every initiative, every plan and strategy that TfL LUL management look at the present time has as one of its key priorities affordability and frankly cutting money. And so what we've found is that each initiative, you mentioned the TSEOs, they are paid significantly less than the London Underground Revenue Control Inspector. They then introduced a new grade of Revenue Control Officer, which is significantly less well paid than the Revenue Control Inspector, and neither the TSEOs or the revenue officers have the same powers to caution and to prepare and to carry out interviews that can then be used evidentially in a court. We find that the revenue that's raised by each prosecution that's been handled by a revenue control inspector for London Underground brings in around £173 of revenue. Those in other parts of TfL where they don't have London Underground revenue control inspectors bring in an average of about 125. A penalty fare notice brings in an average of 18. So we think that relying on frankly lower paid grades of staff to do penalty fare notices and less effective control is unsuccessful. We find that staff cuts on the stations has contributed particularly to the threat of violence that our staff report. And so without a determination to put the resources in that are necessary, it's going to be very difficult to resolve this problem.
Okay, thank you for that. I do have a follow-on, which is just kind of to understand from your members' perspective might be the gaps or shortcomings of TfL's approach. And you said that they're implementing their strategy rather than it is helpful to staff necessarily. Mm-hmm. So I just wondered what is or what isn't working from your members' perspective.
Mm-hmm. But there is a new system for supporting staff who have been subjected to trauma, which isn't exclusive to staff assaults, but includes staff assaults, that's been put in place. We recognise that TfL is doing a lot of work to train people and try and get that system moving again. We support that initiative. The body-worn cameras have been helpful to some staff. The high-profile communication campaign to the public, I think, is welcomed by our members, but I keep coming back to it. But it's identified by the majority of members who respond to any surveys that we do on this. The difficulty in getting the BTP to an incident when it's taking place, and the isolation of staff lone working and barriers being left unstaffed are raised time and time again. And they're the things I think TfL is more reluctant to deal with because it would require more staffing.
Sorry, one final thing just in relation to that. So the point that you make about lone working at stations and kind of juxtaposing that with the issues that TfL has around kind of having to raise revenue but also hiring these, as you said, lower paid staff, is that, in your opinion, a solution, or is that just a bit of a distraction to addressing those staff that might be at stations working alone for much of the day?
Sorry, I'm not.
So is that
sure
fixing a problem? So if you've got the kind of low-paid staff that are out there doing the work of what would have been a revenue support officer, doing stuff once people are on board rather than before they've got before they've entered the station.
Yeah.
Is that, in your opinion, is that a distraction from having more staff in stations? Or?
Yeah, okay, I understand your question. No, I wouldn't say it's a distraction. I think ideally we'd like to have both. I think they perform. Those people perform a useful role. Even with a fully staffed station, there will be people who will always dull in behind someone else when no one's looking or whatever. So on board work is necessary, but it's not going to. I would go further and say it won't resolve the problem of fare evasion and workplace violence, I don't think it will be able to slow down the increase in it either. I think unless you address the question of dealing with the problem at the stations, then I think it will be very difficult to reduce it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Assembly Member Russell.
Thank you. I just want to pick up on what you were just saying about fare evasion and workplace violence, because that kind of seems to put those two things together. Are you saying that all fare evasion is contributing to workplace violence, or is the violent interaction with staff in a much smaller subset of fare evasion?
Yeah, absolutely. It would be completely wrong to say that anyone that evades their fare is likely to engage in violence. That would be entirely wrong. What we're reporting is that where violence occurs, in the majority of cases, that the trigger for that is a dispute over tickets.
Right. And so just roughly kind of what sort of scale, how many of the someone might well be doing this lone working at an outer London station where they're on their own, and so obviously they're not going to intervene if someone's going to barge through the barriers. They're presumably they just note it and report it. But what proportion of those, what proportion might someone working on a station expect to find themselves subject to violence?
I couldn't give you a figure, but I think if you look at the, TfL are estimating that across London Underground, somewhere around 4 point something % of journeys don't have the correct ticket. Quite clearly, 4 in 100 passengers are not assaulting staff. So it is a small proportion of people that are travelling irregularly who engage in violence. I think the point we're making is that a large proportion of people who assault our staff have the dispute has originated in a ticketing issue.
Okay, thank you. That's really helpful to just have that clear, because it's there are all sorts of reasons. We see kids hacking line bikes, and actually they're using them to get to school on time, so they don't get detention. And so there may be all sorts of reasons why someone on a low income
absolutely
might have they might be trying to get to work on time or whatever, and take that risk. Weighing up different situations.
Unquestionable. And TfL, in the presentation they gave to us last week, identify that in 3 out of 4 of the categories of fare evader that they have looked at, that financial difficulties can be a factor in 3 out of 4 of those categories. And of course, because of the absence of an operating grant, the fares on Underground are very high. Clearly a lot of people struggle to pay those fares and resent other people not doing that, and we have to take note of that, and we have to, our members have to administer the railway as it is. But in no way am I suggesting that anyone that doesn't pay their fares is some sort of potential violent criminal. Absolutely not.
Thank you. That's good to have that very clear. My next question is for Michael. Which is about the impact on passengers of the deployment of the transport and enforcement officers and revenue enforcement officers at TfL stations. So what do you think, is there any impact on passengers of these deployments?
Well, I think for the kind of vast majority of people who pay their fares, a visible presence would give them confidence that enforcement to reduce fare evasion is likely to be effective. And it's just picking up some of one of Jared's points. I think this is a case of where belt and braces probably applies. I think the public want to see gate lines properly staffed. They would expect there to be, sufficient numbers of revenue protection officers, TSCOs to carry out their respective roles, but also plainclothes teams riding the network, teams carrying out, for example, onboard checks, particularly of contactless travel. I think people expect, and want to see kind of like a presence as far as possible to give them confidence that those people who may be tempted to dodge their fares may be less tempted than they would otherwise.
Okay, I mean, I suppose the other thing is it makes the whole atmosphere around a station into a potentially intimidating place. I mean, we heard that example that I raised from Croydon, where a woman who had paid her fare ended up being handcuffed and arrested. And so it's you're not concerned about any negative impact on passengers who maybe are stressed about trying to get to different appointments and sort of seeing a line of officers as a kind of stressful encounter.
I understand the point, and that may certainly be the case for individuals, but it's not something that we pick up as a major concern. I mean, the flip side is, going back to the point that was made earlier about the importance of prevention as well as of enforcement. At the moment, evasion happens when people burst through a barrier, where we get people tailgating, going quickly behind another member of the public. The wide aisle gates, which are available for good reasons for those people with impaired mobility. They are a source of weakness in terms of an opportunity that those who want to evade their fares exploit. I mean, it's not for us, I think, to kind of tell TfL what the answer is. Is it a technology-based answer, or is it a staffing answer? It's almost certainly both. But sufficient and visible presence, sensitively managed, of TfL staff, and indeed, where appropriate, BTP staff, I think is an important part of the mix of sending a signal to those who might be tempted that actually there is a higher chance than they might otherwise think that they will be caught.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Assembly Member Russell. And I think those are all the questions from the panel, but I'd like to, we're slightly ahead of time, so give you the opportunity, if there's anything that we haven't asked that you think we should know on this subject, to give you the opportunity. Maybe start with Michael, if there's anything you want to add to the comments that you've made already.
No, I don't think I have anything else to add.
That's fine. Jared, do you have anything else that you wanted to?
I think I've covered all the salient points in response to the questions. Actually, yeah.
Thank you very much. So thank you to our first panel of guests for all your contributions today. So the committee is now going to take a short break before we resume with our second panel, which we hope will be at 11:10. Welcome back to today's Transport Committee meeting where we are discussing fare evasion. Can I please welcome our second panel of guests, Shuan Hayward, OBE, Director of Security, Policing and Enforcement at TfL, and Jonathan Grono, Analysis Manager at TfL. Welcome to you both. So I'll start with the first question and then we'll have questions from the rest of the committee. So I think most of the questions are to both of you, so please do feel free to tap each other in when it's most appropriate.
Definitely do that.
So to both of you, this year TfL announced its plans to halve fare evasion to 1.5% or less by 2030. So why has TfL given itself that 5 years to do that work to halve fare evasion?
So thank you for the opportunity to come and address the committee today on the very important topic of fare evasion. I think it's worth starting by remembering that the vast majority of Londoners who travel across our public transport network do the right thing and use the correct ticket and pay the correct fare for the journey they make. So currently our rate of fare evasion is around 3.5%. So that means over 96% of Londoners from all different backgrounds are paying the correct fare for the journey they make. But we recognise that fare evasion, it's not a victimless crime. It robs Londoners of really significant investment in the transport network, investment that we all want to see in cleaner, safer and more reliable journeys. As you've heard from colleagues already this morning, it doesn't feel fair. If you're paying for your journey, it doesn't feel that someone else is getting away with not doing that. So it doesn't feel fair, and we really recognise that. But also, as you've heard this morning, fare evasion has a really significant impact, both in terms of how confident our staff feel and the safety of our staff. We know that fare evasion is a significant trigger in around 50% of instances of workplace violence and aggression, but it also has a much wider impact on how safe our network feels. So fare evasion is a really significant, important issue for us to be tackling, and it is for that very reason that we've set ourselves a really ambitious target, and we found the target has really helped clarify and motivate the leads across all our transport modes to review what they're currently doing and how we can significantly improve our performance in tackling fare evasion. And the approach that we've got, as we've set out, it is very much about being data-driven, and we can talk more about that. And also, and using data to give us both insights into the different types and patterns of fare evasion on different modes, but also the different types of fare evaders. We can really think about tailoring interventions to different types of fare evasion. Our approach is really multifaceted. We look at how we can think about the design of stations, the design of our gate lines, our ticketing systems, but also the role of our frontline teams, the role of enforcement staff, but also wider behaviour change and technology. So 5 years gives us that real opportunity to explore lots of different interventions, to try, to fail, to move on, because we've got this commitment to innovation within our approach as well. And we know that behaviour, both on our transport network, but actually across cities, across Europe and across North America, we saw a really significant change in passenger behaviour post-COVID. And we saw much more visible rule breaking and changes in patterns of fare evasion. And it's responding to that is at the core of our strategy. 5 years gives us the approach to do that, but it's also recognition that actually for us to really have a significant and sustainable impact on fare evasion, it's not about what we used to do, it's got to be about doing things differently as well. So it gives us real time to test that and try that.
Thanks very much. Jonathan, did you have anything to add at this stage?
No, I think Shuan clarified our position on the objective and reasons why. Thank you.
That's fantastic. Is there anything you feel that could be done to accelerate that process? Is there anything you would need in order to be able to deliver that quicker, or are you sort of confident in 5 years is the right time frame to deliver?
So the approach that we are taking, and was set out in the summary that we published this year, is already yielding results. So we have seen a decline in the rate of fare evasion, and we've used a very sophisticated method to measure fare evasion, and I'll get John to explain it to you if that question's going to come up. But we've seen a reduction in the level of fare evasion from last year at 3.8% to 3.5%. 3.5%, well, to the previous year, 23-24, at 3.8% to 3.5% last year, and that came down from about 4% in the previous year. So we are already seeing a decline in the levels of fare evasion, but we recognise there is a lot more we can do. So we're really looking at about how we support our revenue teams in terms of how they're equipped. We're looking at new technology. We're in active discussions with our gate line suppliers. We're working with academics to think about behavioural nudges in the environment. We're looking at the impact of our communications campaigns. So there's lots that we are having planning, that we're currently delivering, to be able to sustain that significant momentum towards achieving our target.
Fantastic. Yes, I think if you do want to give us any of that data there, that would be great.
Yeah, so I'm going to explain how we calculate fare evasion and the reasons why we do it in this way. So there is no real standard way for metro systems globally to actually calculate fare evasion. Each one is very different. Some use an enforcement approach, basically a detection rate. Some use independent surveys. Other cities have automatic passenger counting. So comparatively globally, there isn't one perfect approach. When we came back from the lockdown situation, we brought all our data together and reassessed how we measured fare evasion. And a significant change for us was the uptake of contactless payment cards. And through our enforcement, we actually identified quite a lot of people not tapping and being checked by our enforcement teams, which gave us an opportunity to gain more data insight. So we use a blended approach to calculate fare evasion. We take surveys that are conducted mainly by external companies on our behalf. That gives us an insight into the fare evasion from what they can detect without the implication of enforcement. Through our enforcement teams and through other systems where we measure tap in and taps out throughout the system, force gates, etc., we're then able to sort of calculate another level of fare evasion. And through our insight in terms of fraudulent behaviour concerning concessionaries, we have another level. In previous years, we only really looked at surveyed and detection rates, so now we have a much blended approach. So a lot of this data didn't exist really before COVID. So that's one reason why we don't really measure ourselves to previous years because of this change, particularly the uplift of contactless payment cards, which was growing before COVID around 30% to now almost 70%. So it's quite a significant change. And as we heard from in the previous session, that opportunity that comes from such technology as well.
Thanks. That's really helpful. So you're saying that, are you saying that there will be a stronger baseline from now to be able to measure it year on year in terms of, but that hasn't, I'm not confident that.
And that's, I suppose, really important as well, that when, as John said, there's no perfect way of measuring fare evasion. We recognise that. But the method that we use means that we can consistently, on a quarterly basis, apply the same method and therefore be able to see what the trend overall is in fare evasion, and that's why we can speak with such confidence about the downward trend that we are seeing.
That's right.
That's helpful. Assemblymember Garrett?
Thank you.
I think it's Assemblymember Garrett first. I know, exactly. Basically the same. And then yourself afterwards.
Thanks. Just picking up on what you were saying, Siwan, about the 5 years, or why take 5 years. So I think you set out pretty robustly why you want to approach it in that way. It gives you time to experiment and try different things, which I'm generally in favour of. Obviously, another way of looking at it is that it reduces accountability in the sense that at any point during the 5 years, we can say, well, you're not hitting your target or on track to hit your target. And you can say, we're experimenting, we're trying different things. Eventually, we'll get there. The graph will look like a hockey stick or an inverse hockey stick, and we will get there. I've had experience. Perhaps you might not say that, but certainly the mayor would say that. I've had experience with the mayor answering similar questions in a similar way. So I suppose my question is about how we can measure some interim progress. So, for example, some of those ideas that you're testing out, presumably you're testing them in particular areas or particular parts of the network. Will you be publishing examples of the things that you're trying and the results that you get from them, so we can actually see this experimental approach adapting and succeeding or not succeeding?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're, as we've said in the strategy, we're really committed to transparency across all our approaches on revenue protection, and we are always updating our public-facing website, which sits on tfl.gov.uk, with updates in terms of both what the rates of fare evasion is, some of the experimental work that we've done, the different approaches that we're taking, and use that as a platform to amplify the effects that we're having in terms of determining the risk of fare evasion as well. But yeah, we are very clear and committed, and I remain accountable at TfL for the progress towards that fare evasion target.
But I suppose what I mean is if you try a particular thing in a particular area, that may not show up at all in the aggregate data, but you will be able to see, within your management data, if you like, we tried this thing in this place, we thought the result would be this. Yeah. Either it was a spectacular success, we're now going to immediately roll that out, or else, for these reasons, that didn't really work. We're not sure we're going to pursue that, we're going to try something else. That kind of information is the sort of thing we usually find it very hard to get hold of. Okay. So what's your commitment to publish that sort of information?
So we are committed to transparency, and we will be sharing insights, particularly when we've tried things and they haven't worked, as well as when we try things and they feel like they're promising and scalable. So we are about to embark on a trial of automatic passenger counting, and that will help us give much greater granular insight into different tactics that we use in terms of the deployment of revenue teams and how they're deployed and where they're deployed and that effect. So we will be sharing some of that insight. We've done some interesting experimentation on the DLR, which I think we're about to publish, which looks at nudging people towards the validators. So how do we get people to see the validators? And it is genuinely an issue that actually they're quite invisible, particularly in parts of our network. So we are currently running some experiments, which is about how do we nudge people towards seeing the validators? Is it through lighting? Is it through vinyls on the floor? To encourage people to tap in and tap out at the end of their journeys. So we're pulling all that together, and we'll be able to publish some of that. So that just gives a kind of flavour of the types of work that we're doing.
So the passenger count, I assume that's sort of an AI-based camera passenger count type thing that's measuring footfall. I was going to ask about that later, but since you brought it up, that's a really good example of the sort of thing that I think we might not see data from if that shows that the number of passengers travelling through an area was much higher than your fare evasion data would generally suggest. That would imply that the rate is much higher than you're publishing. That might be the sort of data that you wouldn't rush to publish, but you will be publishing that, will you? Even if it isn't helpful from your point of view, if it shows that the rate's higher than you currently think.
Well, So I don't expect the automatic passenger counting to show that the rate is going to be higher, because it's gate line based. And I'm just looking to John just to confirm. So it's gate line based, and we already get data from the gate lines, but it just gives us a much more granular level of information to be able to assess the impact of different interventions.
Absolutely. Until we try new technologies, we don't know what information that's going to give us. One thing we do know is on a previous trial where we actually looked at CCTV in a trial that we called Smart Station. We looked at a specific station and people who forced the barrier and counted how many people would come in after those individuals. And roughly speaking, that was near the fare evasion rate that we were identifying from the London Underground. Granted, each station is unique and each demographic using the station at various zones are all unique. So what happens in one location won't necessarily be replicated network-wide. But that's one sort of insight that we're hoping to gain from the trial, but it will be on a cluster of stations rather than network-wide, so it wouldn't really give us that true reflection of the network entirely, but start unravelling some of those opportunities that we can further.
Okay. I think we're going to come back to smart stations later, so I'll pause that because I think it's an interesting topic. But let me so one final quick question then. So in terms of these different ideas you're trying, what's your plan to proactively publish, here's an idea we tried, these were the results, like a sort of mini paper, if you like? Because you've sort of implied that might be what we will get, but I'm not quite sure.
So I suppose I'm afraid I'm going to reiterate what I just said. So our primary portal for sharing our progress in terms of, against our revenue protection strategy is through the public website, and we are planning to use that public website to keep updated both in terms of progress we're making, but also the trials that we are undertaking and the results that we get from those trials.
And you're committed to publish all those trials, the ones that work and the ones that don't work, because they're both interesting and useful information. Yeah. Okay, good. Quick question, actually, finally to you, Jonathan, just on something you were saying about, you said there's no one method for estimating fare evasion, sort of at different metro systems around the world. But what I note is that the Mayor does put great stock in the fact that London's level is lower. But obviously, from what you've just said, if they're using different methodologies in other cities, then they're not necessarily comparable, are they? Is that
well, it depends on the city. And you also have other factors, such as socio-economic factors, which carry quite greatly in terms of fare evasion rate. We have benchmarking groups internationally. New York is a case example. They had very similar fare evasion levels to us that they were identifying before COVID. After COVID, rapidly increased their fare evasion calculations. There's a different methodology that they use on their buses, which does use, I think, automatic passenger counting to some degree. But there's observational ways of measuring on the actual subway system. And the differences there were really, we noticed there was a longer return to enforcement, where we were quite actually rapid following lockdown to return to business as usual for our enforcement activities. That was a factor. But there's a lot of very similarities between London and New York and the infrastructure system there. We also speak with colleagues, say, in the Netherlands recently as well, about their fare evasion levels, which, again, there's a lot of similarities, but they use a detection method. They can use other methods to measure fare evasion, but they traditionally, for comparison reasons, only give their detection sort of approach. Other systems just use surveys. The UK Rail mainline services use a survey methodology. There are limitations within that methodology in terms of identifying how people can exploit technology. And that is something that we've accepted and we've moved on with and incorporated within our new approach.
So and just to expand on that, so in the benchmarking work that we do, and particularly through the Committee of Metros, we are able to strip away the differences in the methods to be able to make them truly comparable, so we can see where London sits against the other metros. Now, obviously, that data is confidential data, but it means that we can be very confident about the comparison of where London sits compared to other metros within Comet. So I absolutely recognise the issue that you're raising, that it feels like you're comparing apples and pears. But the benchmarking work that we do does strip that away so that it is apples and apples.
Okay, and sorry, the comparing London with itself, how far back does that data go? It's quite recent, did you say? We don't have it going back 10, 20 years.
That's right. We started this new measure of fare evasion with all the recent data we have, bearing in mind that we did have obviously a gap of information because people weren't using the transport network to the levels they are now. And even in that first year following lockdown that we started measuring 22-23, our passenger volume was very different to where it is the following year. So that's where we started, and that's where we identified a lot more data sources that we actually use that weren't really captured in that way. And obviously with data retention policies, differences within the surveys we were using in the frequency, we brought everything into line. So scheduling, franchise agreements that didn't use a surveyed methodology, we have actually brought in, such as the DLR recently, to make everything more stable and comparable. So again, comparing to previous years, we didn't have as a complete picture as we do now, and therefore I don't think it wouldn't be necessarily relevant. I think there was I know that there was an overall fare evasion higher level of data used, to estimate a level of 3% in the years prior to COVID. I think it was 2018-19. And that was a one-off study, and that estimated around 3%, I think, for TfL overall.
So before 22, TfL just didn't consistently track or measure levels of fare evasion?
It wasn't consistent throughout the modes and combined into a complete TfL picture. No, it was different measures on different modes.
Okay. Thanks, Chair.
No.
Oh, I'm fine. Assembly Member Bukhari.
Thank you, Chair. Just continuing on the on this analysis and data that we've been talking about and some of the challenges. So Jonathan, to you first. TfL categorises fare evaders as accidental, opportunistic and calculated and chronic. And according to the research that we've been given, accidental is about 5%, opportunistic is 40%, calculated is 30%, chronic is 25%. So which out of those areas of fare evasion is actually causing the highest loss of revenue?
Well, those assumptions are based on the best fit of the data that we have to give us those proportions. We use an average paid fare, which will apply across them. So it really depends on the individual within that category and the frequency. So for our chronic evaders, these are individuals who are more likely to force the network, they're more likely to be abusive, they're more likely to be repeat offenders. We have our calculated individuals who are more fraudulent in their behaviour. They will continuously exploit loopholes in technology and the payment system in order to exploit. They do leave a digital trail often, and that's where our investigations come through. And the opportunistic is a bit wider. These are people we heard earlier about open infrastructure, people who don't necessarily premeditate to commit fare evasion for their journeys. They will enter the system and take it as they see it and maybe exploit it, and the accidental lower degree. So we haven't actually measured an individual within that. We just believe in terms of the range and the percentage that would be equivalent to the value as well in a broad perspective, but it all depends on the individual. An individual for chronic behaviour will carry a higher weight in terms of the value of fare evasion than they will do an opportunistic, but there's probably more opportunistic than there are chronic evaders.
Right, okay.
So, yeah,
Would you like to come in?
Yeah, just to expand on that. So in our approach and how we think about, in terms of how we approach our decision making and the task and deployment of our resources. So chronic fare evaders, and those are the fare evaders that you will all be aware of, because you will have witnessed individuals who are pushing through gates, who are abusive towards our staff, who create an atmosphere on our network that feels less safe than our network is. So they are obviously a focus for our attention. So although they may be smaller in percentage volume in terms of the volume of journeys evaded, their impact is really significant. So in terms of our measurement of the of their impact, we don't just look at their impact in terms of the revenue loss, but we looked at the wider impact they have on our network and design and tailor our interventions to deal with that group, which is then distinct and different from our calculated fare evaders. Those are the individuals who are committing what is much more like an act of fraud. It's premeditated, it's determined, you won't witness it, but it leaves a really significant digital footprint. And that group is actually probably contributing to the greatest revenue loss for us. Their continued behaviour puts us at greater risk of revenue loss. But they are distinct from the chronic group who are causing a much greater impact on our network.
So would you say you're putting more time and resource allocated to the chronic and to the calculated fare dodging?
Yeah, so we are what we're seeking to do is gather together the best evidence from around the world, but also the insight from our frontline teams and insight from academics and elsewhere to really use a kind of talent-led and data-driven approach to tailor interventions to those different groups. But the chronic and the calculated fare evaders do, in terms of our enforcement resources, and they are, and thinking about the design of our stations and our gate lines, and they are very much the focus of our attention. In terms of accidental fare evaders, because we use an overall crime prevention model, and we take this kind of so if you're well versed in crime prevention, you'll know that there's one of the aspects of crime prevention is actually it's about removing excuses. And for accidental fare evaders, we just want to make the system simpler, so we're removing the likelihood of people making accidents in the first place. So just those things I was talking about, like trying to nudge people to see the validator on the DLR when they come out at City Airport, just make it much simpler so people don't make mistakes in the first place. So we're constantly looking at our rules and our ticketing in our systems to actually remove through back office interventions almost the likelihood of you making a mistake when you try to use TfL's system. So that group is dealt with through that way. And the opportunistic, we're also looking at design and other interventions to be able to reduce those. But the calculated and chronic, I would say, are the focus very much of our attention, particularly for our enforcement and investigative resources, but also for our design and behavioural change.
I would concur in terms of the enforcement and prosecutions. Yeah. It is very specifically targeted to the calculated and chronic. For the opportunistic, a lot more of our on-train presence is very vital in terms of combating that particular challenge.
Yeah, I mean, I do want to talk a little bit about how staff are being trained on ways that chronic fare evasion may be increasing. An incident happened with me at Waterloo Station where 2 women wearing bikinis pushed their way through behind me. They call it double gating when they go through. And I think, it's fairly difficult for staff to deal with that kind of approach when they've got quite a unique way of fare dodging, because it's preventing that staff member from acting on it and wanting to pursue that person who is obviously doing this on purpose and doing it in a way that's going to prevent that staff member from dealing with it. Have you seen a new approach to fare dodging that is actually quite worrying, that is preventing the staff from actually dealing with fare dodging, because this is unique and different, and I've seen a BBC article where those individuals have been doing it quite a lot across the network. So quite intrigued by what you think that is going on here. I can see from your face you're going, huh.
Okay, so anyone who pushes through our gates or double gates behind someone, so clearly that's unacceptable behaviour, and it's obviously it's intimidating for our fare-paying customers. And we spoke earlier on. You spoke earlier on with Jared. So one of the interventions that is very much we've put in place, and increased significantly in numbers over the last few years, is the deployment of transport support and enforcement officers, and they are. Their primary purpose is to protect our staff, and so our staff feel supported. It is to protect our customers from antisocial behaviour. It's to safeguard vulnerable people on the network, but also to deal with those kind of antisocial behaviour that you've just described. So they will intervene in a situation if someone pushes through, and will seek to take an approach which reminds people of the what the rules are.
I can tell you the staff member was definitely not going to approach these young women, because they were obviously doing it on purpose. They knew that they would be able to get through, because a staff member wouldn't want to be chasing somebody wearing a bikini.
So although you didn't witness an intervention at that point in time, and it sounds like from what you're describing that there wasn't a deployment of transport support and enforcement officers at the time, which we do deploy across our network to deal, and they do deal very effectively with chronic fare evasion. We do have a number of methods of gathering insight into persistent individuals like the ones you described. So the Gateline staff, whose primary purpose, as you know, is customer service and supporting customers, will make a record, including and submitting an intelligence report. They have a method so that the CCTV is captured on that gate line, and all our gate lines on the London Underground network cover the CCTV, so we can capture the images. We can look to be able to then identify those individuals. So although they may not have been stopped in that moment, we will be putting effort into identifying those individuals and pursuing those individuals.
It seems to have worked, because those individuals have had their images put on a BBC article, which was very intriguing for me. So I'll be probably getting in touch with the police later on to say, I think I know that person, I saw that person. I do also want to just talk very quickly about this analysis that you are looking into in terms of where it's happening as well. I mean, is there any correlation between fare evasion and location as well? Are there certain boroughs that are impacted by fare evasion more than others? Is it in certain areas, for example, where there is more deprived areas or low-income areas that tend to have more fare evasion? Is that something that you've seen?
It's very interesting mapping out with the data that we actually have to where it happens. Footfall is a big factor in terms of fare evasion. It may not necessarily where a fare evader begins their journey. It may be where they are heading to. So it's all often difficult to associate the fare evader and the act of fare evasion, particularly with forcing a barrier through, to their home start destination. So that's always difficult to sort of answer. I wouldn't suggest we'd have the data to do that. Obviously, deprivation in certain boroughs, the socio-economic factors that I mentioned earlier, we know that is a contributing factor to fare evasion, absolutely. But in our approach and the data we use, we're able to sort of measure things like, force gates, where they're happening, and they do tend to be in areas of high footfall and predominantly during peak times of travel. Not always the case, and sometimes there's a different ratio between footfall to the act of fare evasion depending on where it is. So we use a system known as our irregular travel analysis platform, and that takes into account all barrier line information that we can gather in order to, as well as other things, to map out basically where the fare evasion is happening. We have an intel-led approach for our enforcement, so that's our security and also our revenue enforcement, and we take into account other information. So we'll look at a crime, antisocial behaviour, footfall, fare evasion, assaults against, verbal and physical assaults against our colleagues, and map out on a threat risk harm approach, which is dealt with seasonally and periodically to where the greatest challenges are. We'll look at the temporal perspective and give those recommendations to the enforcement teams to actually go. You mentioned Waterloo earlier. That is obviously been a place that people congregate to, as it's a hub. So you will have behaviour such as the double gating.
So you're looking into the psychology as well in terms of
absolutely,
fare evasion.
and we're able to actually
and societal causes as well. Is that something that you could look into?
Yeah, that's a wider
further?
piece. So we're working with the London Interdisciplinary School to actually look at those factors to gain more of an understanding. Yes.
Okay. And just very quickly, is there? Could you give us some confirmation that there is or not any direct correlation between fare increases and fare dodging?
So
there's been no correlation between fare dodging to fare increases that you're aware of, that you would. Yeah, can you just guarantee that that is not happening, that there has been no fare increases because of fare dodging?
As you'll have seen from the data that we shared, we've seen a reduction in the rate of fare evasion between last year and this year. And obviously, you'll be aware that the Mayor made the decision in terms of rail fares and underground fares last year in consultation with the government. So, fares have increased. Obviously, fares remain stable on the bus network, and there's a range of concessionary fares available as well. But we've seen a reduction in fare evasion while there has been an increase in rail fares. But it's not a simple correlation between the two.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Assemblymember Prince.
Thank you. Thank you. Earlier today, we heard from a representative from the RMT, and he alluded to the fact that there are a number of different enforcement officers that you have, different titles. You probably wouldn't be able to do it off the top of your head, but would you be able to share with the committee the numbers of different types? Or could you actually, first of all, just say what the different types are, and then perhaps later share with us in writing if you can, the numbers of each type, please?
So, broadly, there are two types of enforcement staff. So we have revenue protection staff, and we have dedicated teams on each of our rail modes. So London Overground, the Docklands Light Railway, the tram network, the Elizabeth Line, and London Underground each has their own dedicated revenue protection team. Those are teams of officers who primarily are deployed in uniform. They are an effective deterrent against fare evasion, and they are deployed, as John has described, across the network from centralised insight and analysis that John and his team lead to be able to deter and detect fare evasion. And they will be deployed on gate lines, they'll be deployed on those transport modes. And there's a similar team, obviously, who works on the bus network. So we have a kind of, a absolute foundational support for our overall revenue protection strategy is the vital work that's done by revenue protection teams that work on each of our modes. Those revenue protection teams are then supported by transport support and enforcement officers, and on some of our rail modes you'll also see dedicated transport support and enforcement officers as part of the new franchising agreement. So those are enforcement officers and who are also deployed in uniform. They will be distinct on our network because they often wear personal protective vests, and they are accredited with powers by the British Transport Police and the Metropolitan Police to have additional powers for enforcement. They have delegated authority with a range of powers, and they are trained and equipped to be able to deal with a much broader range of antisocial behaviour across our network and provide a safeguarding response and to provide a level of protection for our frontline teams. So they are more of an enforcement officer, more of a kind of sort of rounded enforcement officer, who's they don't have a primary purpose of just revenue protection, but clearly they make a really significant contribution towards reducing the risk of fare evasion and providing that wider kind of capable guardianship and their presence across our network. And then, as I think was discussed this morning, then across our rail modes, our work on fare evasion is very ably supported by the British Transport Police as well, who then have a distinct suite of powers to be able to deal with aspects of fare evasion, and particularly where there's an overlap between fare evasions and other forms of criminality. So three tiers broadly, yeah.
Right, and would you be able to supply us with the numbers of those? Yeah, okay. I don't expect you to know that off the top of your head. You mentioned earlier about the use of facial recognition, especially for... Oh, no, did you? Yeah, no, you mentioned the use of CCTV to identify fare evaders after the offence has been committed. So if someone goes, like the other day in Romford, someone just went through the gate line. I didn't see anybody in the staff make any note of the occurrence, but let's assume they did. But have you considered the use of facial recognition? Do you use that at all?
So so clearly, facial recognition is as a new technology, is being widely used by the Metropolitan Police. We are working very closely with the Met on understanding the approach and the ethics and the biases and the potential issues with how facial recognition is deployed, and also with British Transport Police in terms of the use of facial recognition. We are, as I outlined at the outset, in part of our thinking over the next 5 years about how we best use technology to be able to tackle fare evasion and other more serious forms of criminality on our network. Facial recognition is one of the elements of that, both proactive as well as retrospective facial recognition. We are not currently deploying facial recognition on our network. We are spending time to properly think through and garner views and support about the use of facial recognition, and we'll be taking a very kind of a very thought through and careful approach to the consideration of that across our network.
I think if you were to be able to use or utilise facial recognition, then of course that would help you very much with what I would call serial offenders, because you could identify them, you could track them, you could see how many times they committed the same or similar offences. And again, using Romford as an example, the Met in Romford used facial recognition some time ago now. Very, very effective at reducing crime in Romford at the time. Very effective.
And we are working very closely with the Met, seeing that to understand their results and see how that works. And it's as Transport for London, we are here to provide a safe and accessible transport system for everyone. The opportunities there are for new technologies to support that, we're really alert to. It won't come as a surprise to you that I think every day I'll get someone approaching me with some kind of AI that they're going to promise me is going to tackle all the security, police and enforcement issues. So I have a level of scepticism about this as well. But it is very much within this approach that we're considering in terms of innovation about what we can do within our existing camera network, how new technology can support that. But I don't know if you've had the opportunity to watch our current Channel 5 series, Fair Dodgers at War with the Law.
Yes,
but you'll see...
Really winds me up, actually. Really winds me up. Especially at the end they go, oh, and so who assaulted someone's actually been let off and they walk away free. That really winds me up.
Yeah, but you'll see that obviously we are using techniques which both in terms of in terms of using the data which John's already referred to from our regular travel analysis platform, which gives us patterns of journeys that are being made that require further investigation. And then, as you say, persistent fare evaders, they do have regular patterns and regular stations they attend, so we'll deploy staff to be able to identify them at the gate line in the act of fare evasion from that pattern of data as well. And you'll see that in the programme, and it shows how we are using our existing capability to have an impact on persistent fare evaders.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. I am not watching Fair Dodgers on Channel 5, but I will now.
You will now, and I would recommend looking at season 1 as well, which was focused on TfL completely.
Are you a commission for promoting the Channel 5 programme?
No, but it's all part of the plan.
Other channels are available. Assembly Member Garrett.
We've touched on this a bit already, but obviously what the evidence shows is that levels of fare evasion varies between different modes of transport and perhaps in different areas. How is TfL targeting particular modes where the data suggests that there is a particular problem? So the trams, for example, seem to have a higher level of fare evasion than elsewhere. So what's the plan?
Yeah. So we have tailored plans for each of our modes. So each mode is set a target for the year ahead, and I hold each of our modes to account through a periodic performance meeting on their progress, and we do have tailored interventions for each of the modes. But actually, by bringing the modes together, we see real opportunities. So for the tram network, learning from the DLR network, where there's some similarities in design and nature of the modes, and that means that we see this real sort of flourishing of motivation and interventions across our modes. But John, do you want to speak a bit more about the tailored interventions for each of our modes?
Yeah, absolutely. So. Absolutely. Sorry, got caught by the button. Each mode has a different infrastructure and in itself will have a different challenge. So Elizabeth Line, for example, you have a lot more people who travel outside of the zonal footprint. For the DLR, you have a lot more open infrastructure, which is very different. For the buses, you don't have a barriered system. So each one has their own challenges and opportunity through the enforcement anyway. So mostly managed through franchise agreements such as the DLR. They hire a number of individuals who will do a lot more on-train checking in higher proportions than, say, gated systems. So that's one tactic. Another tactic could be communications. Shuan mentioned earlier, again on the DLR, lighting certain areas of the tap devices, as we know as P-valves, to bring attention. Another area we're looking at is our comms and how we're using social media to actually engage with people that perhaps was not done in high volumes previously. We know that a lot of offenders actually engage with their techniques on social media platforms. So we try to work with social media platforms and we try to put our own messaging out. And that's really where the TV show comes in as well, is just highlighting to people what action is taken and what lengths people will go in to actually commit their fare evasion. So it is all tailored there, and there are different rates across our different modes, but we are targeting that 1.5 across all modes. So some will take on different tactics within their plans in order to try and achieve their goals towards that journey.
Okay. And do you know, specifically on the trams, do you know why, or well, firstly, is it true that they have a higher level of fare evasion than, say, I mean, it's fairly ungated, so perhaps it's comparable with the DLR, higher than the tube network, let's say, or TfL Rail?
Yeah,
is that right?
I would say that trams is a higher rate. Yeah, obviously the footfall is very different as well, and the infrastructure is different, so those are factors as well. And it really comes down to the level of on-tram ticket checking. And they've actually made some reductions over recent years due to that uplift, and are communicating with our partners there that there are more opportunistic fare evaders on trams because of that infrastructure, and the technique that we would recommend using the data analysis is one of check the on-trams instead of doing checks as people get off the trams. It's just to be present on the actual trams, and that's caused an uplift, and we're actually able to quantify that through actually measuring their amount of checking and the fines that come as a result of that. So that is one angle, but enforcement can only take us so far. There are other angles, obviously, to explore.
Yeah, and there's a particular challenge, I suppose, with onboard ticket checking at peak times, for the obvious reason that it's very difficult for a ticket inspector or anyone to move through the vehicle, be it a tram or a tube or anything else, either checking tickets or just finding somewhere else to stand. So I don't know whether you've thought about that particular problem and have any brilliant solutions.
Well, that's obviously going to be a challenge. You know, so many people, only so much room to actually manoeuvre. But, you know, you can move around that. So you could do a lot more. You can change your tactic to, if you can't actually move through the system, you can change your tactic to do the onboarding checking rather than allow the system itself to actually do that, and so on.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks. I'd like to follow up briefly, since we're talking about sort of where fare evasions are particular issues. Now, I know that respecting that you don't want to sort of publicise areas where there might be a problem, or stations or something like that, but I certainly get consistent, in certain areas of London or certain bits of lines, consistent complaints from communities who are paying their fare, where they're saying, well, I see this all the time, gate lines are open, it's like that. Can you give some assurances to people who are consistently feeling they're being hard done by, that this will be dealt with, that you are looking at the areas where there are consistent problems and you will get to this over in the not too distant future?
Yes, and hopefully through this session we can give that confidence. I really want to give reassurance to all Londoners that, as I said at the outset, that we take fare evasion extremely seriously. It is not a victimless crime. It is having a really significant impact in parts of London. It's not fair for other customers. So, as we explore today, we are putting real effort into that, where we see high volumes of visible fare evasion, the chronic fare evasion that we've described. You will see deployment of more enforcement officers. You will see hopefully changes in gate line and changes in methods and tactics. And also, and I hope you all notice this, we are now really visibly publishing the results of our fare evasion activity at every station. So you'll see as you go through, the whiteboards really clearly setting out how much work we have been doing, the number of people that have been stopped, checked and caught, and the impact of that. And that obviously complements the wider communications campaigns that we have on tackling fare evasion. So yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. Assembly Member Wemmer, did you want to come in here?
Yeah. So, hi to both of you. The previous session I just raised, it was a question that I had as a result of casework, and I raised a point of 2 bits of casework on the DLR, which resulted in criminal proceedings and the single justice procedure. So the people in the previous session said this is not something they've particularly come across. So I just wondered if this is something, if this process, to what extent or how far it's used. And much like the kind of knowing that you can't tell us where and which stations, there are particular issues with people kind of forcing gates, it would still be interesting to know, on the occasions that TfL does use the single justice procedure, which particular areas, which particular modes, and the reasons why. And I raise it not because I'm opposed to you enforcing against people not paying their fares, but in these 2 particular cases, it did so they were both appealed and successful eventually. But the punishment definitely did not fit the perceived crime. It was an accidental situation that had occurred. But the reason I raise it was because we've seen a lot recently around the use of the single justice procedure, where people are receiving criminal penalties for, in the case of these two, genuinely accidental infractions, but with huge ramifications had they not challenged those two particular circumstances that they were in. So I just wondered if you could maybe in your developing plans look at the use of that. Obviously it'd be great to use other penalties whilst at the same time enforcing to make sure that people understand the seriousness of genuine kind of ongoing fare evasion.
So thank you for the question, and I encourage you to all look. So we publish our revenue enforcement policy, and we are currently reviewing that policy, and we would welcome the input of this committee and across London in terms of our approach on that policy. So broadly, we will. I mean, obviously, our revenue enforcement officers will use discretion, as will our frontline teams. But that accidental fare evasion, where someone's genuinely made a mistake, or has got a ticket, but it's not the right ticket for the journey they're making, we would deal with that through a penalty fare. For repeat offending, we will deal with that through prosecution. And as we've heard here, we do see fare evasion is a criminal offence, and it is an offence which is clearly it's non-imprisonable, but it is dealt with through the magistrates' court, and we use a single justice procedure, as with other similar offences, as a means by which we deal with to work with the magistrates' court in terms of dealing with the volume of prosecutions that we make. So we use prosecution as a method. We have been working incredibly closely with the Ministry of Justice on the use of the single justice procedure, and we share the commitment that the Ministry of Justice made to bring in far greater transparency to the use of single justice procedure, to bring a far greater level of public awareness to the use of single justice procedure, because we share what sounds like your concern as well, which is that when individuals are invited to participate in the single justice process, they often don't respond to that invitation, so therefore don't have the opportunity to put forward mitigations. So we really share that commitment that the Ministry of Justice has made in terms of safeguardings. But I would highlight that unlike a number of train operating companies around the UK, TfL has been praised for its approach in terms of the use of single justice procedure. We have a team of dedicated prosecutors who are distinct and different from those who are carrying out revenue enforcement on our front line. That team of prosecutors will apply the proper procedural tests to decision making, and they will determine whether there's sufficient evidence of an offence having been committed, and that likely to result in a conviction, but also whether it's in the public interest. And they will, write to people. They will further investigate. They will ask for mitigations and explanations as part of coming to that decision to prosecute. So we do already have a distinct team of prosecutors, clearly overseen by TfL Legal, and who work in line with the regulatory code for public prosecutions, but we're always seeking to strengthen that. I'm not going to miss the opportunity, particularly because it's a public broadcast. So what we often see is people just don't get engaged with the process, and that's really, really unfortunate, because we have a really strong history of actually hearing mitigations, hearing appeals, and not discontinuing prosecutions when people bring forth those mitigations. But often when people receive correspondence, they just kind of don't want to engage in it, or think they can ignore it, it will go away. And that's really unfortunate, because we will, the process continues. There's a timeline on this, because clearly swift justice is vital as well. So I hear your concerns. I don't know your specific cases, but we are proud of the approach that we take, and the fact and the very careful consideration we take on prosecutions. But we are always open to suggestions on how we can strengthen and improve that approach.
Okay, no, so that's reassured me somewhat, and as you say, it's a concern rather than a criticism. I want TfL to be best in class, so it's reassuring to hear that compared to train operating companies, we don't kind of reach for that as a matter of course. I guess off the back of that, and I suppose we all have our anecdotal experiences of using different bits of the network, depending on where we live and where we travel to and from. And I would be really interested to see if there are particular modes or particular stations where some of these actions emanate. And I also would like to see, however small, even if it's a few, like, you know, I don't know, a couple of, 20, 30 a year, I don't know what the number is, to understand where that happens and how that decision is made, and if there are particular areas where it happens for slightly different, but I hope obvious reasons, because I would not want, like I say, these two cases were resolved positively, so that's good. But, you know, it is terrifying to receive a summons to court in what you thought was something that was resolved and what you thought was a genuine error and so on and so forth. I just want that full transparency, and I think TfL and members of the public would really appreciate that. And like you say, you're working with Ministry of Justice to look at the use of single justice procedure and its appropriateness, and whether or not there are other mechanisms that you can use to still enforce against people, because like you say, it's a criminal offence, people should not do it. However, there are some cases where the use of magistrates' courts by some public authorities, not saying you, has been to reach for that and just criminalising a lot of people at the moment across the country. So I think it would be helpful as you develop your strategy to share that with the public and with staff.
So we are currently just to give sort of further illustration of that, so we're currently engaged with the Ministry of Justice about piloting. We'll publish this, the results of this pilot, as long as the Ministry of Justice agree with us, about piloting a different notice for single justice, because it's trying to make sure that it's much clearer, there's a much clearer understanding about the process that you're in, the opportunities for providing mitigations, what the nature of the charges, the legal rights are, what the options available are, because we really want to tackle this issue that actually within the single justice process, many cases are heard in absentia. So it's because people haven't engaged in the process all the way through. So that doesn't feel like, you know, that doesn't feel right. So that we really want to close that gap and encourage engagement in that process. So single justice procedure is the standardised procedure that the magistrates' courts will use for offences like fare evasion. Obviously, if you plead, you have an opportunity to appear in front of a magistrate's court, and if you would like, I can invite you to come and see how the magistrate's court deal with fare evasion. We have regular court dates with Lavender Hill and other courts if you want to have greater insight to how we do this.
Thank you. Assembly Member Russell.
Thank you, Chair. And good morning. Was it still morning? It may not be. No, it's not anymore. Not quite. Good afternoon. So moving on to some questions about the psychology of fare evasion. There was some research done in Melbourne that looked at setting public transport fares in Queensland at 50 cents, which I'm assuming is a small amount of money. I don't know the Australian exchange rates, but that apparently led to a 27% drop in fare evasion. And the research said, you know, this aligns with the idea that fare evasion is at least partially a rational economic decision. When the price is lower, the incentive to evade diminishes, though it doesn't disappear altogether. They also stated that the reason why people still fare evade when fares are low is due to social reasons, such as negative feelings towards an unreliable service and whatever. So it's all incredibly complex. But we also have a situation in this city, which is an incredibly expensive city to live in. People are paying very high housing costs. They're struggling often on low wages, and actually getting around this city is an expensive thing. I've also noted that you brought in from penalty charges collected 1.3 million, whereas the cost of enforcement is around about 22 million. And I just wondered if you've put any thought into other ways addressing this, like with credit, for a certain amount of credit for travel for people on very low incomes, or people who are doing volunteering, or, you know, the things that that might actually help some Londoners who are really struggling to be able to afford to pay for transport, that might be a sort of positive incentive rather than the kind of more punitive approach.
Thank you for the question, and I think I want to go back to my first point, which is the vast majority of Londoners are paying the correct fares for the journeys that they make, and so we see over 96% of Londoners, and that's a huge diversity of Londoners, have got the correct ticket for the journey they make. And you'll be aware that TfL offers a really significant and wide range of concessionary travel opportunities. There's freedom passes, there's zip cards for young people. So there's already a range of different ticketing concessions available for people in a whole range of different circumstances. So, and also you'll have seen, obviously, the Mayor's retained a commitment about keeping the bus fare at £1.75, but clearly the setting of fares is a matter for the Mayor.
OK, so TfL isn't doing any research into other ways of providing concessions to people, or even thinking about, you know, making travel free at certain times of day or anything like that.
Well, we're always thinking about what we do to keep transport, you know, accessible, safe, and affordable for everyone. I mean, specifically in terms of.
Well, we did a trial recently for the Off-Peak Friday.
Yeah.
So that's something we have looked at, where there was a period of time where travel on a Friday, because we looking at the travel patterns, there was a downturn in Fridays. And I think that's just due to the nature of how people actually commute to work these days. Very much so. So that was to encourage people for a lower fare on the Friday, which obviously would help the city with more people travelling, etc. It's interesting what you said about Melbourne. I think the last stats I had from Melbourne in terms of their fare evasion rate were actually higher than ours. I think it was 4.1%. And they have different penalty fares for adults compared to younger people as well within that. But still, it is higher than ourselves. So whilst, yes, Melbourne, I think many years ago, we actually looked at some of the studies to actually base our fare evasion categories on, where we had about 3 back then. It was the accidental, the calculated and chronic. But we introduced that opportunistic based on a study that we done with our customer and insight that actually involved fare evaders themselves, and that really highlighted the need for a different category for that opportunistic. That was in April 2024, I believe. And it's very interesting in terms of sharing what other benefits to promote travel and payment of travel, and not all of them from certainly that focus were necessarily deemed positive to the fare evaders themselves. We attend global ticketing conferences every year, where we participate in, you know, presenting our understanding, and really we're on par, I think, with categorising our offender profiles, but also within that come other opportunities that other cities are experimenting with, citizenship cards, etc. So we do take that into account within our programme and look at. But it's still quite vague in terms of success of those at the moment, but it's certainly on our radar.
OK, well, yes, I mean, I hope you'll, as Assembly Member Garrett was asking for data and information, do share information on that kind of research as it moves forward. What about the education and messaging campaigns to reduce fare evasion? Can you say a bit more about those?
So Well, our communications approach on fare evasion is multifaceted. So, as you will know, we start very early on. So, through the programme that we run through the London Transport Museum, then that goes out to schools. We make sure at the primary school level and on that transition from primary school into secondary school, as more young people are taking on independent travel, often for the first time, that they get entitled to a zip card. They see the value of the zip cards and the journeys they're making and complying with that behaviour code. So that's our real fundamental, foundational kind of, communications to all young Londoners about and they get access, obviously, free travel on the bus network and tram network as a result of having a zip card, and also, reduced price on all our rail networks. So that's a really significant education and initiative. Then we also have a range of communication campaigns in the way, both through social media as well as messaging on our network, and we are about to commence a kind of evaluation and impact of those campaigns. And as John already described, we did some market research into fare evasion to really help tailor some of our communications campaigns, which we did back in spring of 2024, which gave us real insights into sort of fare evasion psychologies and how people receive our messaging and the impact that messaging has on fare evasion.
Yeah, absolutely. There are things like nudge behaviour, for example, that we look at to sort of promote and prompt people to actually tap in and tap out correctly. We mentioned the posters that go up in the store, which serve to actually show our colleagues working at stations we are actually doing something through enforcement of fare evasion and what that looks like in terms of numbers. But yeah, it is something that takes a holistic approach regarding communications. Social media, I think there's more opportunity that we're exploring as well, because really that's how younger generations are interacting with each other. It's not necessarily going to be a notice in the station. It may be you're travelling through the station with headphones, so you're not hearing audio announcements that we've tried, hence that nudge behaviour I mentioned. So it's getting the message in front of their screen, and we have started rolling out TikTok videos using our enforcement teams and showing examples about how you can be checked for your revenue and to check your ticket, and what to do to be prepared for that, and that's a normal process. So, yeah.
And just on the age profile of the people, I mean, it's obviously a small number of Londoners who are evading their fares, but do you find that there's a lot of people who would be in that category who have recently finished having a zip card type concession and they're suddenly faced with adult fares?
No.
Okay, that's interesting.
No. I mean, I think that broadly the age profile of fare evaders is, so they are adults, and I mean, hearing your line of questioning, so particularly for those individuals who are calculated fare evaders, who are deliberately making decisions to evade paying the correct fare for the journeys they make. Many of those are in, we talk about, includes people in very highly paid jobs who are just thinking they can get away with it. So there's a really broad profile of fare evaders. The majority of people that we stop and penalty fare or prosecute are adults, but it is a real cross-section of society as well.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Assemblymember McCartney.
Yes, I suppose I want to ask about perhaps accidental fare evaders, and I come in on the Hertford National Rail line and transfer, and I can see it particularly at Finsbury Park, people getting off that and down into the tube network are genuinely confused whether they need to tap in or tap out, and I think people with season tickets as well generally don't know whether they're transferring from particularly National and TfL services, whether they need to or not. So my question is, are you doing work with those other service providers that are not Transport for London so that the messaging is consistent and it's very clear about what you need to do in those circumstances?
Yes, and there is clearly more that we can do, but we So we have regular forums with the other train operators in London to talk about obviously a wide range of different issues, but will include opportunities to share and compare how we're dealing with fare evasion, to look at where we have interchanges and make sure that signage and the information is clearer. So yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
The signage there, but it's not clear whether you need to.
No.
No. So people are genuinely confused. Yeah.
Thank you. And just on the trends, you said earlier on, Jonathan, I think that it's been an uptick since COVID, and that was actually, we didn't sort of expand on that at all, although you mentioned sort of increased contactless. So is it less people travelling in daily, so less travel cards, so just more, because of course if you've got a travel card you're not going to evade a fare, you don't need to. Is that what's happening? But you also said it's happened in New York, so I don't know whether they've had the same thing there, or is it something else that's happening that's much more psychological apart from around rule evasion around COVID?
So in terms of the take-up of contactless payment cards, we knew this was growing. And I think in other financial transactions, certainly through the pandemic to introduction of the pandemic and then post-lockdown, there's been an uptake in contactless payment card usage, digital wallets as well. And I think that's because of the downturn in cash, really. You notice that in shops. Retail.
Yeah, but why would that be related to fare evasion? Is my question, I suppose.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so it's just I know. Yeah, I know we use less cash. I know what happened in COVID there. But in terms of what's the dynamic that's happening post COVID that's increased fare evasion? Is that something that's happened to our brains to do with COVID that you don't understand, or is it bog standard? People don't have travel cards, so every day they're making a decision about to whether pay that, and so there's just more opportunities to go, oh, I'm not going to tap in now. Is that what it is?
That's where that research study came in, that really highlighted that opportunistic, and that's really driven our recommendations for our enforcement teams to do the on-train check specifically around contactless payment cards. Absolutely.
Right.
So, and I suppose just to add to your point, that actually obviously people with travel cards often, well, no, there is some, in terms of that calculated fare evaders, there are obviously individuals who have travel cards but who only have, say, a travel card for zones 2 to 6, but are actually travelling through zone 1. So a travel card isn't automatically not a form of fare evasion. So we do have evidence.
But it might drive a particular, as you say, the opportunistic, but if you're absolutely set on it and there's a way of doing it. Right, no, that understood. It wasn't, I have a travel card, I think.
Which I'm sure covers all the zones that you travel through.
Of course it does, yes, absolutely. I'm not trying to, out myself. Assemblymember Garrett.
Hello. In terms of thinking about specific methods, one of the things that Paris tried, which seems to me to have merit, was to focus almost saturation enforcement in a particular area on a particular line or particular part of the city, and really enforce very heavily in that area in order to not just pick up the occasional person who might be either deliberately or accidentally evading, but actually to really drive a change in attitude of like, oh, I suppose I better buy a travel card, or I suppose I probably better change my habit in terms of consistently tapping in, or whatever the French equivalent of tapping in is, rather than as an alternative to sort of broadly nibbling away at the problem all across the city all at once. So you really drive down the problem in one area and then move on to another area. And I think you were talking earlier about sort of criminology and approaches to crime, and that seems to me to have merit. Is that something that you've looked at or would look at in one of your trials that you'll be well documenting and telling us about?
It's something that we already do, and John can talk in more detail about the sort of task and deployment or enforcement teams. But we do see real merit in that approach, particularly where we have interchanges between different modes, that we ensure that we deploy enforcement teams to the bus network, to DLR network, to the underground network, supported by policing. So that we have that multimodal approach, and we have that, that really clear, clear sort of strength in enforcement in those hotspot and interchange locations, and that is part of our deployment strategy. But clearly in our deployment strategy, we're all obviously trying to both have a widespread effect as well as an intense effect at particular locations, and we are using the best data and intelligence to be able to inform that in how our teams are deployed. But yeah, absolutely, there's real merit in the approach that you've described, and it's one in our tactics that we use. John, did you want to expand on that as well.
I think perhaps, I don't know if I've quite conveyed it correct. I think what you've described is something different. So you're talking about persistent hotspots. So, for example, where you've got a big terminus with a big interchange, something like that, that's likely to be a persistent a location, not least because there'll be more heavier footfall and therefore more of everything, fare evasion and everything else. What I'm talking about is, let's say hypothetically you have 7 lines and there's a fairly even pattern of evasion across all of them. Maybe you focus on one for 2 weeks and you really drive down levels of evasion on that line, then you move on to the next line and really focus effort on a line, achieve a kind of behaviour change in that line or on that line, which is not necessarily worse or better than any of the others, but afterwards you would expect to see it to go down and then move on and focus on one of the other lines. From your face, I'm sensing that might not be something you thought of.
I suppose I'm just intrigued, and you've kind of we'll go away and properly look into this. But I mean, obviously, our approach is multimodal, and we are acutely aware that we don't want to see displacement of fare evading behaviour from one mode to the other. So to do so, if we took a line on London Underground, but then didn't also look at what's happening on DLR and the bus network and the Elizabeth line and the other modes. I mean, that's so that our approach is back to having a consistent consistent approach to tackling fare evasion across our modes and a real unified approach to that, rather than having a...
For example, if you did that on the Windrush line between West Croydon and Central London, where else are they going to go? I mean, they could go on the main line.
They might go on the bus.
But all the way to Central London? I mean, I wouldn't recommend it. Anyway, sorry.
Well, we'll take away and look at it. And if Paris are committed to a transparent approach, then maybe they've published the evidence about that intervention and its impact, and we can scrutinise that further. And we've got good contacts with Paris through the benchmarking work.
Yeah, and just to answer your question about the deployments on a particular sort of route against the station, we do have that view within our tasking process. So we do look at those zonal areas. We do look at the difference of rates between on-train to at station within that approach as well, and we periodically review that to make sure that we are recommending that deployments are best suited, but in and around that as well, based on reports that we get from our colleagues, which is something that is quite loose within the data. Our colleagues perceive fare evasion. They don't necessarily always tell us about that, but where they do, we do other operational activity, and that can be multimodal as well. For example, London Underground, where there's interchanges with the London Overground, Highbury and Islington, for example, they will do operational activity there for fare evasion for those interchanges between modes. So, yes.
Okay, thanks very much. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, I just feel like I need to say we've been whispering off the back of Assemblymember McCartney's question. Highbury and Islington's in my patch, and I take your point that you make, but further to Assemblymember Garrett's question, if you were to ask anybody how to switch modes at Highbury and Islington Station from the yellow reader to the pink reader, find a pink reader on the first platform versus the fourth platform, nobody will be able to tell you. So I just think, and I hope that there is a balance between people might be doing the wrong thing and you might be perceiving, as you said, fare evasion, but actually nobody really knows what to do in that very well-used station. I'm a regular user, and just for safety, sometimes I tap. But if I'm on the other platform, there's nowhere to tap, so I just don't tap. Do you see what I mean? There is a gap between what people want to do the right thing. There is no physical way to do the right thing in a lot of places, and I think that gets more and more the case the further and further we get from the centre. Highbury is relatively central, but it still is basically a suburban rail station. So I just think that we need to have a bit of balancing the two things. Kind of people aren't necessarily evading fares because they want to or they're trying to. And just back to my point, that's how this person got into being summoned to court.
Okay. So, as you heard us describe, we absolutely recognise that there's accidental fare evasion happens because the system is not as simple as it should be, and it's not as straightforward as it should be. We recognise that, and we're working with our colleagues across who lead on ticketing and who lead on validators and gate lines to try and just eliminate the likelihood of those mistakes happening in the first place. I mean, that's our responsibility, and that's part of our 5-year plan. We'll do that. And obviously, we welcome all feedback from you as Assembly members and from and the constituencies about where confusion could be created, and we'll seek to address that.
Thank you. Assemblymember Turrell, who is virtual.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, I can't be with you today. So I'll start off with Cyan and Jonathan, which is if we start with Jonathan, we'll go in reverse order to all the other questions. What training does the TfL staff receive on managing fare evasion?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that? I didn't catch most of that question.
Yeah. What training do Transport for London staff receive for managing fare evasion?
Okay.
So do you mean, which staff do you mean? So which staff do you mean? Do you mean gateline staff, customer operations staff? Do you mean revenue protection officers?
Any staff that will have any engagement with potential fare evaders.
That's quite a big question.
So should we start with the gateline staff, who obviously, because obviously.
Do you know, given the breadth of the question, can we take that away and we'll just give you a written summary of all the training in terms of, so for customer-facing staff for each mode, what training they receive in terms of ticketing and the guidance that's given in terms of how to respond to fare evasion, and then we can talk specifically about the training that revenue protection staff undertake and the transport support and enforcement officers undertake.
Is that okay, Assemblymember Torrell? Are you happy to receive that in writing, or is there anything specific you want to ask? That's fine.
No, I'm happy with a written question on that one. If I can then just drill it down, just flicking through the supplementaries, specifically on bus drivers, because I don't think we've spoken a lot about bus drivers. Like, what action are bus drivers encouraged to take if somebody boards a bus without paying?
So was it what action the bus driver?
Bus drivers, yeah, if somebody boards without paying.
Yeah, so bus drivers are equipped in their cab with a call button that can record if someone does, push on the bus. Obviously, all bus drivers, as part of their training, are encouraged to remind people about the importance of tapping in, but yeah, they also can record fare evasion through an SMS messaging that comes into the central control room, and part of that SMS messaging then is used for the task and deployment of revenue protection teams that work across the bus network.
Thank you. So moving on to my next question then, which is, what is TfL doing to reduce incidents of violence and aggressions towards staff as a result of fare evasion?
So as you would have heard this morning with, I believe when you were speaking to our colleague within the RMT, we've published a workplace violence and aggression strategy, and our stated position is that, aggression and violence towards any of our frontline staff, and then by that I mean everybody who works under the roundel. So obviously that is gateline teams, but also to teams who are cleaning our network and the enforcement teams we have. That all forms of violence and aggression are absolutely unacceptable, and they are preventable. And it is our goal that we are seeking to eradicate the risk of workplace violence and aggression in its entirety from our frontline teams. Everybody has a right to feel safe at work and to get home safely from work. So you'll have seen that we have a really comprehensive workplace violence and aggression strategy in place. An element of that strategy, which is also multifaceted, has been, as we've already described, the rollout of body-worn cameras. So all TfL directly employed staff now are body-worn cameras are part of their essential kit. And over the last year, since we've seen the introduction of body-worn cameras, as well as a number of other measures, we've seen a 12% reduction in physical incidents of violence against our frontline teams. So along with the evidence that we see across other train operators and across other settings, body-worn cameras is having a real impact in terms of reducing the likelihood of physical aggression and violence towards our teams. We also have, as we described, transport support and enforcement officers who are there to protect our team from workplace violence and aggression. We have the support of the British Transport Police. We do communications campaigns. We are training in terms of conflict de-escalation. So we're equipping our staff across TfL to be able to manage situations, reduce the likelihoods of violence and aggression. So we have a really comprehensive plan in place to reduce the likelihood of any forms of violence and aggression happening towards our frontline teams.
Thank you. Thank you for that. So the TfL have any plans to install new ticket gates at stations that are currently ungated?
So clearly, for parts of our network, it's just not feasible to install ticket gates, but we are in active dialogue with our gate line supplier as part of ongoing commercial negotiations, and looking very carefully at a whole range of innovation that's underway in gate line design. You'll probably see that if you travel elsewhere, but we are looking at gate line design both for our current gates and the potential opportunity for upgrading those gates, but also looking at what measures we can put in parts of our network where it's just not feasible to install gates, but how we best reduce the likelihood of fare evasion happening in those locations. John, is there anything you want to add on that?
No, I think you covered it. Absolutely right. Yeah, of course, we do speak. Our policy team and our analytical team do speak with providers. We go to various forums where the gates are showcased, and we look at the different gating that actually is implemented in other metro systems, and what opportunities they have, and if they are relevant to London, we'll feed back into the programme as we work towards our objectives.
Thank you. And then final question from me then is remaining on gating. Obviously, there's going to be big changes to the way transport, the railways are run with franchise changes to franchising and whatnot. Are TfL currently communicating with the current rail operators, such as South Eastern, to understand their priority stations for installing new ticket barriers?
Well, through our benchmarking, we do work with other rail operators, and we do uncover what changes to infrastructure they're implementing and what benefits that they can share with us that may prove useful for our own insight.
Thank you. And then just off the back of that, thing, although I promised that would be my last one, just off the back of that, if TfL takes over the running of some of these routes, like I know South Eastern's franchise, I think comes up next year, are you going to inherit their priority list for stations that need ticket barriers, or will you be restarting and basically publishing your own priority list?
Can we take that question away? I'm afraid that's not really our area of expertise. We're here to tackle fare evasion, not wider questions on rail devolution. And
Thank you. That's me done, Chair.
Thanks, Assemblyman Motaro. Yes, if you could get an answer for us, I think that's an interesting question.
Yeah.
But, understand it's not your priority. Can I just follow up on a couple of staffing things that we heard this morning? We heard that loan working and also failure to provide meal cover was undermining the ability of staff both to either physically be there and keep the gates shut, and also their ability to challenge appropriately. Is that something that's going to form part of your review in terms of how staffing and cover and rosters are ensuring that there are people available on stations?
So for London Underground, you'll know that we've just stood up a new model in terms of the provision of, in terms of running of customer operations with stronger levels of supervision and support across our network, but also in terms of our overall approach of London Underground for their contribution towards reducing the risk of fare evasion and progress towards our target. One of the areas that they are focused on is on gate line integrity, so keeping the gates closed at all times, because clearly that provides a physical barrier to reduce the risk of fare evasion. And we are also looking as part of that at remote gate line management. So that's about how we can manage gate lines through our control room functions and through our a range of other functions. And and there's lots that can be done in this area. We did some interesting work on London Overground, which was about gate lines, about having the CCTV screen so people can see themselves coming in, and what the impact that has in terms of psychological nudges about seeing themselves and what impact that has in terms of that you've been captured, fare evade or not fare evade. And so there's a wide range of activity underway to be able to reduce the likelihood of fare evasion.
Yeah, that all sounds like a lot of we're trying not to put more staff on stations, to be honest, where they're needed, because obviously if you can have the gate line closed, but if somebody's determined, if there's not even anyone there to see it, then hop over it, to be perfectly honest. You know what I mean? Obviously, it's important that they're close and somebody there. So that is a bit of concern that actually trying to design out, because we heard this morning how important that human interaction is in terms of fare evasion. So you're saying that isn't really a big consideration in terms of the ways you can control it.
So in terms of the staffing model for customer operations, so for gate lines and customer staff within all our stations, I mean, clearly all our stations remain staffed from the start of service to close of service. There's staffing is a vital part of the presence, and is a clear role for staff to remind people to tap in and to purchase and to have the correct ticket for the journeys they make. So staff are a fundamental part of that, and we have new franchises and new operating models coming in on the Overground, Elizabeth Line and DLR, and we have with Overground franchising coming through next year, and we, as I said, we've just introducing a new model within London Underground customer operations, which will seek to improve that staffing model, but also provide staff with the support that they need so that they feel confident to tackle fare evasion.
Doesn't mean physical support and not people there and people to relieve them and make sure that there's always people visible on stations. So just to make that point, it's not the same thing. But I see the point you're trying to make, but that's not really what we heard this morning, and I don't think it's what passengers are really interested in either. Assemblymember McCartney.
I just wanted to follow up around the issues around lone staffing at some stations, and have you done any work to establish whether stations where staff have tackled or tried to tackle fare evasion, that the risk of injury or assault of any kind is more prevalent if there's a lone person trying to do that rather than a busier station, perhaps with other staff around?
There is, to the best of my understanding, and I will take this away as well, but there is no evidence that there is a greater risk of violence and aggression where staff are lone working. So there's not evidence to support that assertion.
And we also heard this morning about the time it can sometimes take for enforcement officers or the British Transport Police to get to any incident. And we heard that request generally goes through, I think was it the route operator or the control room.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering about what weight is given to responding to requests if it is a lone staffed station. Would they move up the priority because it is just one person on duty?
Yeah, so we are doing. We've worked really closely with the British Transport Police over the last year on what's called their optimised policing model, which seeks to redeploy their resources so that we can minimise the response time, so that they get to incidents as quickly as possible, and also they have sufficient numbers of officers available for neighbourhood policing. So ideally, obviously we want policing presence alongside enforcement presence there to prevent violence and aggression happening in the first place, rather than just to think about response capability. But clearly, if a call comes through on the Connect radio, then we have British Transport Police co-located with the London Underground Control Centre, and clearly the risk will be part of that decision making, and the British Transport Police will deploy on an I-grade an immediate response to if a member of staff is being threatened, there's a threat of violence against them, and that will be the risk will be taken into consideration, which will include other people there. But alongside the deployment of British Transport Police, clearly if a call comes in, there will also be the deployment of TfL staff to provide support.
Thank you.
Thanks, Assemblymember McCartney. We do have a few questions left, so I don't want to go over this too much, but I am quite surprised to hear that there's no evidence to suggest that lone working increases the chances of violence and aggression, because that just seems common sense that if somebody's on their own. So are you able to provide us with the research that you've done that shows that there is not an increased...
I mean, it's
I know we have a few more questions, so I really can't. I'd love to talk about lone working for hours and hours and hours, but are you able to provide that to us? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Assembly Member Prince.
Thank you, Chair. I know that a number of members of this committee have been what was loosely called tailgated when going through the barriers. What are TfL doing to protect customers from being tailgated or, being brushed aside as they try to get through the barrier?
So, as we've already described, people pushing through our gates, whether that's through tailgating or pushing through the wide arc gates, is, those chronic fare evaders are a really significant cause of significant focus for us, and the deployment of our transport support and enforcement officers is a critical part of their role, is to prevent that behaviour. Now, you'll have seen that TSEs, when they're deployed, if someone pushes through the gates, they will physically intervene, they will engage with that customer, and they'll remove that customer from the network. So for those individuals, our overall tactic is that we want to deny their entry onto our system. But we're also exploring what other methods we can put in place in terms of technology and to prevent tailgating happening, and that's one of the areas that we're exploring with our gate line providers.
Right, thank you. Also, obviously, it's quite likely, isn't it, that someone who tailgates or evades fares has an antisocial habit, and is likely that they have committed other crimes. So what do you do in relation to liaising with the Met Police about people you find who committed the offence of fare evasion? Do you pass their details on to the Met?
So as you described tailgating, obviously the responsibility for policing the rail and underground network sits with British Transport Police. We have a really strong and positive relationship with British Transport Police, and they give us a lot of support across our modes to revenue protection exercises, because, as you say, there is a real overlap between forms of fare evasion and other forms of criminality. So they get huge benefits from working with our revenue teams and our transport support and enforcement officers. I spoke earlier about the fact that transport support and enforcement officers as a key layer within our overall security and policing approach are accredited by the Met Police and the British Transport Police with distinct powers, and that means that they have the ability to check the police national computer for anyone who's stopped, be able to understand whether someone is known for other offences or wanted by the police. And we've seen on numerous occasions where individuals who have been stopped for fare evasion are actually wanted by the police for other offending, and then obviously the police will attend and deal with that individual.
That pretty much answers the question, because I wonder whether you've not just dealt with the BTP but also the Met, because access to their national computer is quite vital in identifying people who... Yeah,
so our accredited officers get access to PNC as part of that, yeah.
Assemblymember McCartney.
Yes, I wondered, with regards to tailgating, whether you collect, or whether you're able to collect, any information about the people who are tailgated. So, for example, do people who are intentionally setting out to evade by tailgating, do they target, for example, women or perhaps elderly people who they don't think will turn around and necessarily retaliate against them? Because it seems to me you talked about it's a victimless crime. It's not a victimless crime before, but it seems that for certain groups this could really add to the concern about travelling, particularly at certain times of the day.
I think those evaders... so first of all, we wouldn't have that data that gives us that answer. But with our tailgaters, they will tailgate at the opportunity they see. I would find it unlikely, even though we don't have the data, that they would be targeting specific individuals. If they see an opportunity, particularly if a station's busy, for example, so many people going through, there may be less risk to being seen tailgating. So I think that predominantly is the primary factor. Our colleagues who work on our stations also report persistent offenders through to us. So if there is a location that has a high volume of those reports, we will pass that through to our to our enforcement team, so they're aware, and any descriptions thereof in order to look out for. If there's anyone tailgating that's been identified for a particular school, for example, that will be passed on to our school liaison team.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Assemblymember Bakari.
Thank you. An independent report on fare evasion in New York stated that modernising turnstiles and gates was the single most important thing they could do to reduce fare evasion in New York. Now, do you agree with that statement? Do you think that this is the single most important thing to do? If not, what is? And what other types of learning have you done from New York and other cities similar to New York, maybe Berlin, Paris, Tokyo, on turnstiles themselves?
So thank you for the question, and I will invite John to speak particularly about the benchmarking aspect of this in terms of comparison with other cities. But as I set out at the beginning, so we've gathered the evidence together in terms of setting out our revenue protection approach, and it is compelling evidence that actually what you need is a multifaceted approach. So there's no one single kind of measure. There's no one simple measure that's going to is going to eradicate the risk of fare evasion. Clearly, the design of our gate lines and the presence of gate lines is a factor. And as I said, we are in active discussions with our gate line suppliers about ways that we can look at changing our design of our gate lines. Now, I think New York they used to have turnstiles, which are really, really easy to get under or over. We don't have those form of gates on our network, so they were coming from a very different starting position in terms of the approach that they've taken, the investment they've recently made in changing their gate lines. But there's no simple solution to this. Gate lines are clearly part of it. Enforcement's clearly part of it. Communications clearly part of this. Behavioural nudges are clearly part of this. What's seen as socially acceptable is clearly part of this. So all of those elements will work together to reduce the likelihood and risk of fare evasion. But John, did you want to talk specifically about New York?
Yeah, absolutely. So it was quite fascinating looking at the New York study. They've really identified the challenge that they have in most recent years. And yes, infrastructure for New York was really mixed. It wasn't necessarily standardised. The turnstiles, for example, can be really easily breached. So breachability is a factor. So it does not surprise me that that would be their key area of focus. It wouldn't be the same area of focus for us because we don't have that same barrier line system. New York was also quite fascinating in terms of their enforcement, which differs on the subway system to that on the buses. And this goes back to the prior point that I think I failed to answer, so apologies, around contactless payment cards and cash on the buses in New York. And one of the reasons why we believe that the fare evasion rate is so much higher on the buses compared to the subway system is because the use of cash. And actually the enforcement teams therefore wouldn't have the means to identify or check payments as we do. For example, you can check a contactless payment card with a device, see if it's been used. In New York, certainly on the buses, you would have to actually witness the actual act of fare evasion, which may predominantly be cash. So how do you know how much cash has been put in to by the driver's entry on the system? Very, very challenging. And people do exploit that. We don't have that here, and that's one of the reasons why we are a lot lower than New York. And in addition, on the subway, and that return to enforcement following the periods of lockdown, the NYPD enforce fare evasion on the subway system. And therefore, if someone is identified and it's brought to prosecution, it's down to the courts. If it's not a priority for the courts, it's not a priority for the NYPD, therefore less enforcement. But yeah, they're looking clearly at the level of financial value of their fare evasion and taking a lot of steps. And we speak to them very regularly, actually, and get updates.
Lack of time, but I did want to know about other cities, but I don't think we've got much time to go into that depth.
Not really, no. Is there anything you would like to ask to
I did ask about other comparative studies in terms of other cities. But
do you have anything you could share with us?
So I believe in the packs that we put forward, we've put those other comparatives. We mentioned earlier those comparisons with Amsterdam, for example, and their system, their barrier system has a lot of nudge behaviour. There's a light, so if they believe you are tailgating, it's more of a nudge to embarrass people not to do that behaviour. So that's something we've picked up there. A lot of the information we actually receive is confidential, so that's shared with the community of metros and that academic work there that we are part of, but we are not at liberty to share a lot. So where we do our benchmarking is through open source and actually communicating with those other cities. New York has been a big factor in that, as well as the Netherlands as well.
Yeah, sorry. If there is anything you can share, that would be good, because I don't think we do have anything about... Did you say... I can't remember what city you said. Sorry, I have short-term memory loss. But yeah, if there's anything you can share, I don't think that has been provided with us in terms of your own benchmarking.
We can provide a summary.
That would be
Absolutely.
great, yeah. But yeah, we're not going to be able to talk about that for any much longer. Assembly Member Garron.
Thanks. Just very quickly, actually, it's just been brought to my attention a story in the Standard from 2022. At that time, TfL launched a big initiative to crack down on fare evasion, which at that time was stated to be about 3%, costing about 100 million a year, and by 2024-25, it would come down to 1%. Obviously, that didn't happen. So what are your thoughts on why that initiative failed, which you're applying to this new initiative?
Well, I think the data that we actually had then is very different to where we are now. Obviously, that 3%, a lot has actually changed in terms of the nature of how people travel, what opportunities they take to commit fare evasion, exploit the system. And obviously, we had the pandemic and the changes.
That was a 2022 story. That was a post-pandemic story, yeah.
Sorry, could we repeat? So the 3% being...
Yeah, so I'm reading from the story. It says an extra 60 tickets. So this story is from 15th of July. Apparently, this is the time when we talk about fare evasion. 15th of July, 2022. Chronic fare dodgers are to be banned from the tube under a new crackdown after concerns that evasion is costing Transport for London significantly more than 100 million a year is the story. And it talks about hiring more ticket inspectors and doing various things. And prior to the pandemic, fares were dodged on about 3% of journeys, costing TfL about 100 million a year. TfL is seeking to reduce evasion to 1% of journeys by 2024-25. That was in 2022. And obviously here we are now in that year, and we haven't got 1%.
No, so you're quoting from a...
I'm quoting from the Standard story in 2022, which I'm going to go out on a limb and assume was based on information given to them by TfL in 2022.
Yeah. So as we've set out, we spent... it was clearly, we have always been ambitious in our approach to tackling fare evasion, and we remain ambitious. 2022, we were seeing a return of passengers to our network, and we're seeing more people using our network more often as we came out of the global pandemic, but also real changes in the way that people were travelling. And we saw real changes in commuting travel versus leisure travel, and that's now much more stabilised. And although passenger numbers are increasing, so that ambition was set out in 2022. But then, as John said, we did some really thorough work to really understand this change in method, that people are now using contactless payment cards, that people are travelling at different times. We've taken that evidence and insight, we've taken more evidence and insight, and we have now set a much more, what is a more realistic but still challenging target that will get to 1.5% by 2030, and that we are seeking to take a multifaceted approach that really drives behaviour change and reduces the risk of fare evasion on our network, then compared to potentially what might have been the approach that we set out in 2022, which I'm sure has got my name on it, where we were enthusiastic in our ambition, but potentially not as well evidence-based as we are today.
Right, but you can see now why I was interested in an interim target, let's say. But I do need to move on to what my final question was going to be. But anyway, that explains my cynicism at the start of the meeting about setting a target 5 years away. Just on the smart station trials, that's the final topic here. one of the things that looked at was, using AI to track people moving through the station and the many things that can be done with that. I think it's about 2 years since that trial ended. So what's happening with that initiative and what can we expect to see?
Yeah. So we are continuing to use, so what's described as smart stations means about how we can adapt our existing CCTV technology that exists across our network with software adaptations that then can learn about patterns of behaviour and use that insight and information to trigger either interventions from staff or or interventions through our revenue enforcement, or through this area that we're exploring, which is around use of facial recognition and ability to identify individuals. So currently, the technology that was devised as smart stations, we're actually looking at the safety use cases of it. So looking at in terms of the potential to reduce incidents where of our customers getting hurt at the interface with trains. We're continuing to look at that technology and how adapting our CCTV technology can really support the work that we're doing on fare evasion. So it remains a very live arena of technology evolution that builds on our existing camera network, but means that we can get greater insights, both through the deployment of enforcement teams, but also how the system can correct itself so that we reduce the likelihood of mistakes happening, and also how that technology through AI and capabilities such as live facial recognition may play a part in us tackling fare evasion in the future.
Does that include using that sort of technology, like AI camera technology, to measure footfall through a gate line area or a station entrance and compare that with the number of people tapping in?
Yeah, so we did use that. So for the Smart Stations trial at Wilton Green, I think John already talked about this, that we did compare what was captured through Smart Stations cameras, and then what was captured at the gate line, and what was captured through the rates, through the way that we measure fare evasion, because our gates obviously record what happens, and actually we found that the rates were very similar, so it gave us confidence about the way that we measure fare evasion. John, I think you already talked about
that. You're right, you did mention that earlier. I'm just very conscious of time. One quick question then. But there aren't plans to do more of that or to roll out that more extensively across the network, for example, around the DLR where you don't have a gate line?
So one of the trials that we're hoping to start soon is automatic passenger counting, which will be a different technology, but that will hopefully allow us to actually see how many people will pass through using sensors, essentially, not necessarily cameras, and actually see comparing those valid taps to people passing through the network. And we'll hopefully be able to expand and have a deep insight into that testing area to the levels of fare evasion, and if that matches our current model, yes.
And do we know when?
I haven't got the exact dates that trial will start, but we can get back to you.
Yeah, we are now out of time. So if I could ask you to respond in right, if that's okay. Yeah, you just get get.
And on the final point, obviously
we are now out of time. I'm sorry, we are. No, that's fine. And just to say, the commitment from 2022 that Assemblymember Garrett referenced, we'll put that in writing to you so you can respond properly to it, if that's okay, when we write to you with commitments. So we're over time. How did we manage that? So thank you very much to all our guests for your responses today. And you're now free to leave, but we'll be only a couple of seconds. Can I ask the committee to note the report and the discussion? Agreed. Can we delegate authority to me as chair in consultation with party group lead members to agree any output arising from the meeting? Yep. Can I ask the committee to note its work programme? Yep. The next meeting of the committee is scheduled for the 25th of September at 10 a.m. in the chamber at City Hall. There is no urgent business. Thank you. The meeting is now closed.
This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by.